thought it was hysterical. We're hoping it transfers to our operation, and it's just not like, what is that? But if it is, we apologize. I have to explain. So.
Nick, do you happen to have a Wi-Fi password?
Yes. Oh, the other end.
I'm just gonna stare at that.
Somebody's just getting off on YouTube.
Cool. What are you guys' names?
I'm Chelsea Richardson.
Cool.
Shane George.
Right on. I'm Riley Hubbard. I'm actually with LNK News.
Oh,
I'm
cool.
here to cover the happiness y'all got going on here today.
Oh,
So
cool.
that's cool. I'm just wondering what I'm asking everybody today, what makes them happy? Like what brings you joy in life?
So, can I ask you a question back?
Yeah.
What do you mean by happy?
I knew he's a philosopher, remember?
Yeah.
That's a good point. That's a good point. I guess content is more accurate.
Yeah, so I mean, it's important because, like, sometimes Schadenfreude, I grin when I watch things go with politicians I don't like when they're. I don't. It's not exactly happiness, really, but
But
it's.
it is a kind of content.
It is a kind of content, right?
I have a password if that.
Yeah.
that
Okay.
would be probably helpful.
It's 893 KZUM Lincoln, all lowercase, and then the percentage symbol. 893 KZUM Lincoln percentage. And I'm guessing that it's showing up as a KZUM network.
Yes.
Okay.
When I told my husband that I was coming to a happiness seminar, he said, "What are you doing? You're going to go sit around, eat ice cream, play with Kitty?"
Man, I mean, everybody's got their own kicks. It's interesting.
We'll do that next year.
That's your idea.
That would be cool. For a while, my roommate's friend had a dog, my roommate's dog had pups, and so like right next to my room, there was just this like huge conglomerate of fur and like little yaps all the time. So it was like whenever I was having a bad day, I would just like walk in there and like just sit down with the pups. It was really nice.
Yep.
There is that old saying, happiness is a warm puppy, right?
Oh,
That's true, yeah.
There's the answer. Now we can all go home.
Oh, that's it.
I find on my own end, I actually get a decent amount of happiness from teaching and performing when I play music. So both of those are important to me. Contentment-wise, it's not like I'm normally just grinning when I'm doing it. But
Yeah.
as far as like I think like
I'll hear
meaningful
the story.
activity.
I am the oldest.
Yeah.
I'm
Doing this up. Part of the presentation. Yeah, I also derive a lot of joy from. I also teach philosophy and study philosophy, and I derive a lot of joy from that. Developing fulfilling relationships, whether that be friendships or otherwise. I think there's something universal in what makes people happy, but I wouldn't. I don't think I share your view of what happiness is. I think it's something beyond contentment. At least, I think there's a wide array of what people would call happiness. Contentment probably being somewhere in there. But I think that there's a deeper sense of happiness, that if one's striving for happiness, they should strive for that deeper sense.
cool.
And actually, best evidence is you shouldn't strive for happiness at all. There's a paradox of happiness. It turns out if you try to strive for it, you actually tend not to be able to achieve it. You strive for other things that then generates happiness. And that's the solution. Something weird about our psychology. You keep asking yourself if we're happy all the time or not, and how do I make myself happy? It just makes us anxious.
just being, just existing, then where it's at.
It's the other things, right?
It's all in the journey.
Right. You don't? Yeah.
So what are you doing?
Sorry, this is taking a little, we didn't, we're,
You're thrown under the bus.
yeah.
Okay.
We're almost there. Another minute or so, we'll be ready to go.
Cool.
I'm sorry, can you remind me your names again?
Chelsea Richardson.
Oh,
Shane George.
I'm sorry, I'm terrible with names.
I should have brought name tags. Another note to self. Okay. Historic note, the sort of the scholar that got the field of positive psychology going, Martin Seligman, partnered with the Gallup organization back in the late 90s to start organizing what would a field that focuses on psychological well-being look like. So there's a lot of brainstorming and conferencing amongst scholars in the Caribbean. And then when they wanted to sort of announce it to the world as this positive psychology thing, they had it here in Lincoln, Nebraska in 1999. So this is the birthplace of this discipline. 2014, 15 years later, I partnered with UNL and put on a conference on that theme, and that kind of I had fun doing that, and so this is sort of a residual thing. Every March 20th is the official International Day of Happiness, so we jumped the gun a little bit, but I figured more people might be able to
Show up on a Sunday then.
yeah. So that's a move that I usually make, is I just move it to whichever weekend's closer. So yeah, you can just put this in your calendars as a repeating annual event. Yeah. So so that's kind of like a little bit of history. If you Google, or not, if you search for positive psychology, like in Facebook, there's a group there. I started off as an administrator on it, so I'll continuously like comb journals, news sites on psychological well-being, and post whatever I stumble across to this group called Positive Psychology on Facebook. This was really interesting to see over time. When I started, there were about 300 people already in the group. This is back 2007 when I first sort of discovered like Facebook and Twitter and all that. And it's grown to over like 100,000 over time, something like that. So interest, I guess, out there in the world is skyrocketed or whatever. So, but I found, although that was fun and kind of fulfilling to do this thing online on social media, like personally, like nothing compared to getting face-to-face events organized and like doing something with it in person. So that's like the longest ongoing thing that I've myself have been up to. But like this, I enjoy like 10 times more even. It's crazy. So, yay, nay.
What do you do when you're not putting on presentations?
Well, occasionally I'll go speak on it. I'm actually in the job search myself right now. I'd like to see if I could do something related to this, like in an organizational setting, sort of internal community building within an organization or out in the community. Volunteer manager. Those are kind of what I'm looking for at present myself. I did a large chunk of remodeling and saved up enough to go on a job search. So that's how I describe where I'm at myself right now. So, yeah. Do you guys, what's the volunteer base like for the blood bank?
Not showing.
What aspect?
I was wondering, is it like actively recruiting?
Yeah.
I mean, the main thing is just the actual donors themselves. But
Right, yeah, so we have volunteers that do come into each center for, I think it's a 3 to 4 hour time span. Really, they just have their times, they just sign up for it. Jessica Richards, or no, the marketing person, Erica, I think it was the last one, 3 months old there.
yeah.
But she's in charge of that, so the volunteer, so if you were interested, they really it's just sitting and assisting donors with drinks and snacks after they make their donations.
I was bringing it up as one of the I like well-being because philosophically it's a concept that has been being kicked around in philosophical circles for several millennia, and it seems to be there's no definitive
Yeah, that might be a
statement
bad sign, actually.
of what it is exactly. So I think it's a good subject that relates to how we live our own lives that we can have conversation about potentially indefinitely if it's been going on for 2 millennia already. But then on the psychological research side, one of the findings is engaging in volunteerism like an hour to 3 a week is one of the activities that's suggested to boost psychological well-being. So note to others, if you're interested in volunteering, you have a venue in which one can do that. So
All right. So we are about ready here.
Things get up and we got it up.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay. So there will be some pauses at various points to show examples of what we're talking about. And at that point, I will turn my computer around.
You run a short.
Okay.
So the dialogue takes place where 2 philosophers are walking through crowded streets in their polis, Feministicles and Misogynistus.
I'm feministically.
You'll figure that out.
Yeah. So what's the deal with sexist humor?
What do you mean?
I've been reading Mary Bergman's What is Sexist Humor and What's Wrong with It? I mean, what's the deal? Why is women's oppression so funny?
That's a really interesting question. Can our sense of humor be wrong?
Oh, that's not exactly what I asked.
Feministically, there's a long history of philosophical discussion on this issue. Over the last 30 years, many people have tried to address that question, so I'm certain that's what you meant. Some believe the solution lies in assessing the attitudes involved in making and laughing at a joke. So instead of assessing the joke itself, we should use the joke as a proxy for the attitudes held by the people hearing and or laughing at that joke. Those would then be morally assessable. So if the joke indicates morally problematic attitudes, then...
So then sexist jokes are only problematic because some people have bad attitudes? How do we know that that's why they're laughing? Maybe they're just nervous or uncomfortable.
Yeah, this might be why we should abstract away from the sexist issue feministically. We need to look at a generalized problem and not get caught up on identity politics. It could be any form of morally problematic attitude, really.
But then it just seems like you're saying, I'm not a sexist, but...
Sure, but we could use this for any number of associated similar subgroups. The morally problematic attitude could be a racist one, a classist one, an ageist one, etc.
So we might broadly call this the I'm not a sexist and associated similar subgroups, but problem.
That's really a bit long-winded. Yet another virtue of abstraction is that,
Then how about we abbreviate it? We can call it the sexist ass problem.
well, that's shorter, but
But the sexist ass problem points out there's more going on here. After a while, I stopped believing that you're not a sexist.
that's also an interesting point. But I think this focus on sociological issues is damaging the philosophy. Maybe we should consider the merited response solutions to the general problem.
I'm not quite sure we've solved the sexist ass problem yet.
Sure we have. The key is to think abstractly about the objective normativity in the form of the joke.
Well, I'm now thinking abstractly about the form of the sexist ass.
Are you sure you're not thinking about an instance?
Oh, no, I am.
Maybe you should stop thinking about butts. Maybe there's a fact of the matter as to whether or not a joke is funny.
I've heard you tell a joke. There is.
Okay, right. But I mean morally, not aesthetically. The merited response solution is to say that a joke is funny or not, in part based on the moral normativity. So going back to your original question, can our sense of humor be wrong?
That wasn't my original question.
Yes, our sense of humor can be wrong when it violates moral norms.
So sexist jokes are bad because sexism is bad.
No. I think you're overly focused on sexism and it's getting in the way of your objectivity. I don't understand your obsession with this issue. How often does it really come up?
Constantly.
I hardly ever encounter sexism. You see, if we abstract away from the sexism issue, we can see what is really going on here. These jokes are not bad because sexism is bad. They are simply not funny, and the people laughing are responding in error.
Simply not funny, and the laughter is an error.
Yeah.
Sounds like a Dane Cook performance.
Exactly. Problem solved.
But it seems like there's something you can do with sexist humor, but there's nothing you can do with Dane Cook jokes.
What do you mean?
Sexist humor can be used to redress harms done by sexism. Consider Charlie Hill's stand-up performance. He's a Native American comedian, and I think we should show his video now.
I think so.
Just having a garage here on the desert, but I saw TV cameras. I'd like to introduce now a new talent on the show, a man that I met and gave me my name, Bunji. He's a black spirit.
Can you see it?
An Indian brother here at Koi Nation. Mr. Charlie Hill, please welcome him.
Usually a problem doing my act, you know, because I know a lot of you white people never seen an Indian do stand-up comedy before, you know. Like for so long, you probably thought that Indians never had a sense of humor, you know. But never thought you were too funny either.
Yeah, I still don't see what this has to do with sexism.
Well, you're not being abstract enough. Similar things get done with sexist humor as a means of reclaiming power. And we don't want to take that tool away by telling disenfranchised comedians that they objectively can't be funny while doing so. In this case, Hill is retaking the political discourse by highlighting why the dismissive characterization of Native Americans as humorless is itself steeped in a context of oppression. By doing so, he reclaims the narrative about his people surrounding the perceived phenomenon.
Wow. I've never really thought about how reclamation projects could generalize that way.
See, he's not being abstract enough now.
No, it's probably still you. Perhaps the best solutions in this problem is to go with an emotional responsibility or ER theory. This says that our sense of humor can be wrong when or because of the harms done by certain jokes.
So sexist jokes are wrong because they do a harm to women?
I guess you could say something like that, given your intentiveness on doggedly pursuing this particular non-issue.
But what about cases where no woman is present?
Well, that's just locker room talk. People say all kinds of things in locker rooms.
I don't know what you say in locker rooms, but it seems like women can still be harmed by the context created by the acceptability of that talk.
I'm not immediately sure how that could be. I mean, if somebody is present, then...
Then someone could talk about grabbing women by the...
Right. Okay, so that could be a problem.
By the pussy.
Themistocles, our polis is relatively conservative. You can't use such language, inappropriate language here. People might get offended.
What about women who are getting grabbed by the...
Got it.
By the pussy.
Are you through? People are staring.
I bet they are offended. And that talk set up a context where some men think it's okay to grab them.
I think we get by the point.
By the pussy.
So you're saying that emotional responsibility should extend to the society at large, not just the potential victims that are present.
It seems like we lack the resources to fill all of ER's expensive prescriptions. It's not clear that we can control what we find funny. The phenomenology of laughter makes me think that I don't really choose when I laugh. ER's diagnosis doesn't differentiate the community ailments, but it sticks us with all of the bill for accidents that we aren't at fault for.
I see what you're doing there. Well, maybe we shouldn't be too judgmental here. Given we don't know why people are laughing, we would have trouble knowing what their laughter says about their characters. Smuts suggests we shouldn't be so immodest as to impugn the purveyors or recipients of sexist humor for bad character.
Smuts suggests?
Smuts.
Plural?
No, just one guy, Aaron Smuts.
That's an inauspicious name.
You should hear what he calls his view, the effects mitigated emotional responsibility view.
That's succinct. We should shorten it. We can call it the ear view.
Ears don't have views.
Is that a joke?
Apparently not. Okay, let's just call it ear.
That's basically what I just said.
Okay, so on Smuts' ear...
I hate you.
No, you don't.
I wouldn't be so sure.
Right, so on Smuts' ear, we should still focus on the emotional responsibility, but we should maintain epistemic humility. We don't know what a person's character is like for sure based on their telling of a joke or laughing at a joke. We also can't always control when we laugh. As such, we should mitigate our responses to those who engage in or laugh at sexist humor.
I see the point, but I'm not entirely sure I can tell. In every case, it's like that sexist comedian, Lady Gaga Fonzie. Fonzie Lady Gaga. You know, the guy with the slick back hair and the glitzy leather biker jacket, the 80s.
Oh, you mean Andrew Dice Clay?
Yeah. Fonzie Lady Gaga. I'm pretty sure he was just sexist. Like, despicably sexist. Didn't you say that you thought he was funny back then?
I'd really rather not talk about it. I was young and foolish then.
And what are you now?
Well, old and foolish. Look, everyone thought it was funny back then.
Everyone?
Okay, well, a lot of people. He was really popular in like '89.
Well, here's where feminism can do something for Smuts.
Maybe that name's not so inauspicious after all.
We can go back to Bergman's original feminist insight.
But each of these theories seems to get something right. Attitudinal theories point out the importance of character. Merited response theories point out objective normative concerns. Emotional responsibility theories draw our attention to the harms done. And EAR points out that we can't always control our responses. Maybe we just have to abstract more.
Maybe we should abstract less. Bergman's feminist insight is that the cultural context itself is the subject of evaluation. Readings of Bergman's work focus on the influence of sexism on cultural context, but overlook the bidirectional nature of those cultural contexts. Sexist jokes and the sexist circumstances in which they are made tend to reinforce each other.
How is that supposed to work?
Well, let's consider another case. Do you remember the comedian Liz Neely and her feminist sexual position jokes?
Yeah. She was the one who made those sexual position jokes after finding her younger brother telling jokes about sexual positions, or the guy does something weird and the punchline was misogynistic.
Right. I should probably just show them that.
Yeah.
I'm the second oldest oldest of 5 kids, and I'm really close with all my siblings, but I'm especially close with my little brother Sam. My little brother Sam is about 10 years younger than me. The thing about Sam is he's only known me as a comedian. So it kind of has shaped my life being a comedian. I'm very honest. I've never told him a lie. I just kind of tell him as it is. And I always thought that was really cool about our relationship until pretty recently when I found out that we don't have boundaries, and those are important. This is how I found out. So a couple months ago, my little sister and my little brother were living together at the time. And I walked in on one of the weirder conversations for an older sister to walk in on. I walked in on my little brother telling my little sister like those funny sexual position jokes. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? They always have a title, like the rusty trombone. It's always something fucked up, like you come in her eye and it's called the pirate. Shit like that. So this is the one I walked in on. Is a dude fucking a girl from the back, but that dude leaves. Another dude starts fucking her, but the first guy goes in front of a window, waves to her, and it's called the poltergeist. And he's laughing, and he's like, isn't that funny? You're a comedian, isn't that funny? That's so funny, isn't that funny? And I was like, no. I've been in a male-dominated field for 12 years. I've heard every fucked up thing you can do to a woman. It's always something that ruins her hair, and I'm not okay with it anymore. I really care about my hair. So I decided, as someone who essentially travels the world and does spoken word, that it's kind of my responsibility to spread feminist sexual positions. I have a lot of free time. I came up with 3. Position number 1 is a dude going down on a woman. She squirts in his face. He learns to respect women. It's called the 19th Amendment. Alright, save your energy. I got 2 more. Position number 2 is a woman riding a dude. She gets him about 30% away from an orgasm, but she gets up and leaves. It's called the Equal Pay Act. Position number 3 is my favorite. It's just a woman masturbating in a kitchen. A dude walks in sad. It's called make your own dinner.
You know, there seems to be a bit of a delay there in the processing of jokes that isn't present in the old school version of the sexual position jokes. That makes me think about Lafayette and Schenk's paper, Belief in the Basis of Humor. They think that the listener is engaged in an active process when they get the jokes. So they argue then that from phenomenology to humor as a fluctuation between possible sets of beliefs.
So standpoint theory could explain the delayed processing. When Mealy presents her jokes, there's a heavier cognitive load where we consider the implications of the alternative standpoint, the feminist standpoint.
Okay, I see where you're coming from. I'm not against feminist theories, but that still doesn't get us to the bidirectional cultural context thing.
Well, it does when we consider relational autonomy.
Is that the ability to be autonomous when in a relationship?
It is, but not the way that you're thinking.
How do you know how I'm thinking?
I know you well enough to understand your cultural context. Just hang in there. It'll all make sense in a minute. So when we think about what it takes to be autonomous, we often overlook the cultural conditions which enable our decisions, actions, and beliefs. Feminists have developed theories of relational autonomy to address this. The basic idea is that we are both a product of and the creators of our cultural context, and our ideas of autonomy should reflect that.
But why should I believe that this is bidirectional?
Cognitive penetration.
Cognitive penetration. It sounds like mind rape.
Oh, it sort of is, at least in the context we're worried about. It's when background beliefs or context influence the contents of perceptions, in this case, auditory perceptions. When Mealy makes her jokes, they rely on a series of beliefs about the conditions of women in our society. On one hand, we have the cultural context under which the sexual position jokes are understood, and on the other hand, we have the feminist critiques of the culture at large that they are placed in proxy for the sexist attitudes assumed in these jokes.
I think this is starting to cognitively penetrate.
Additionally, Mealy relies on cognitive penetration mechanisms similar to those discussed by Susanna Siegel in Cognitive Penetrability and Perceptual Justification. By understanding the cultural context our community members share, Neely can use pragmatic implicature and explicature to frame the jokes so as to lead us to expect certain outcomes. Then, given the expectations inherent in our cultural context, she utilizes the cognitive penetration of beliefs underlying those expectations to highlight the absurdity and oppression inherent in our culture's expectations of women in terms of sex, equality, and various other types of social labor. As we consider that absurdity, laughter diffuses the resistances that would normally arise when confronted with the negative import of our biases.
And I thought there were going to be more dick jokes here.
Oh, there are. We're not going to limply ignore this opportunity and just let it peter away. The fact that you think of dick jokes when you hear the term cognitive penetration proves that cognitive penetration is in play.
Does it? Maybe there's just something about the verbiage.
You know how like the first phenome in penetration and the first phenome in penis are the same?
I think that's a stretch.
I've found that it's not polite to talk about the size of these sorts of conversations.
I'm getting a bit weirdly uncomfortable here.
That's because this conversation has shifted the social power dynamics
I'm picking up on that.
through cognitive penetration. And note that were merely to switch the gender roles, the actions described would be nonsensical. Such calls for equality are asymmetric in our cultural context. Also, the inherent disrespect in the format is highlighted, where our cultural context normally obscures it. This leads us to consider our culture's inherent oppression. The disrespect in the joke doesn't manifest as harmful to males. Instead, it enables our identification of the harms that this destructive context causes to us all.
Those size jokes seem at least a little pointed, though.
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough. The difference is in the overall scale of these sorts of harms that are implicit within the culture. These size jokes are more harmless, in part because we're in a culture where there are fewer impositions and less oppression towards men.
Right. Okay, so our sense of humor can be wrong when it contributes to the oppression of others. And when we have an obligation to correct, and because of this, we have an obligation to correct not only our own character, but that of our society where we can. As participants in that project, we are responsible for the damage caused by both our own attitudes and the attitudes that set the baseline understanding of social interactions.
Yes. Our standards for considering the ethical status of sexist jokes should utilize a harm principle that's sensitive to the disparities between various group members in our shared cultural context. These jokes and our sense of humor aren't criticizable or of concern when they use this harm principle. More importantly, when they seek to correct the ills of our society, these jokes can not only be funny, but laudable.
You know, it seems like we should end this with a joke.
Agreed, but I can't think of any.
We could do that one about mansplaining.
Mansplaining, that's...
You see, feministically, mansplaining is where a guy explains something to a woman in the case where she actually has a better understanding.
Seriously? That's been this whole discussion.
Huh? Well, what makes you say that? So I'll see you tomorrow then? So that's our paper. Hope you enjoyed it.
We'd be happy to answer any questions. You know, it's kind of...
You could also be placating us because we're used to this, and whenever we present a paper, somebody asks questions. So
there's
this is style.
There's a lot of technical sort of vocabulary in there, and we'd be happy to explain any of it.
Well, that's really cool. That's an interesting perspective because, like, for one of my jobs, I'm also a satire writer, and so you know, I think a lot about like what crosses the line or what is like off limits, and you know, I sort of used to be under the impression that, oh, you know, everything's okay as long as you're just joking about it. But that really does offer a cool sort of like understanding of how, you know, things like sexism, even if they're a joke, do perpetuate this oppression in society. So like, you know, that really hits home because that's something that I deal with on a frequent basis. And yeah, appreciate that.
That was kind of the like what started the whole project was how do you make jokes about stuff that are, you know, politically sensitive and both of us study feminist philosophy, so sexist jokes were a sort of easy place to start. And also there's this article in Jezebel. Who's the author?
I forget her name. She's a stand-up comedian, but I don't remember her name off the top of my head. Basically, when that Daniel Tosh scandal was going on in 2012, because
he made a rape joke,
and then somebody in the audience said it's not funny, and then he said something like, "Wouldn't it be funny if like 4 guys raped her right here?" There's this big explosion on the internet of
and everyone laughed.
About all of this. And one part was like, "Look, rape jokes are off the table," and the other group's like, "It's free speech. You can say whatever you want." And so she tries to like give some explanation of why like one is doing harm and the other like perpetuating this attitude that this is okay, and the others, there are ways to make these jokes that aren't doing that. And so part of what we're thinking is, well, we could do a philosophical investigation along those lines to say what the parameters really are in more detail. So that was part of what got us started on this.
And we found that there were a lot of resources among existing feminist philosophical theories, like standpoint theory, which says that knowledge is sort of a relationship between you and an object of knowledge, and cognitive penetration is a sort of up and coming thing in philosophy of mind. And so we sort of like put all of these things together to try and explain what was going on, that basically, you know, the people who say rape jokes are always off the table and the people who say, no, anything's on the table, it's all it's all part of free speech, like they're essentially, they're both wrong.
Just because they're too coarse-grained about it.
Yeah, they're just, too coarse-grained, exactly.
And also, it was a strange thing as a philosopher to do research for, because that meant like hours of watching YouTube videos of all comedy acts. I came to one really interesting conclusion. Like, if you look, because we were not initially aiming specifically at sexist humor, but any of the things that might be related to the sexist ass problem as it is. And so when we went looking into this, there's plenty to be done on like racist humor, and that seems to have changed a lot over the course of the last 30, 40 years. But sexist humor is still alive and well. Most jokes that are told regarding this sort of thing are of the negative side, and they're just reinforcing these sorts of norms, which I thought, I would have thought there would be more balance, but it's pretty, not entirely the case, but it's mostly ubiquitous. And that really kind of alarmed me, because it wasn't something I realized would have been an upshot from this, but our culture clearly, apparently, that's just the norm of the joke-telling structure at this point.
You find an example of a positive joke. Everybody goes away feeling better and nobody's offended.
Oh, well, I mean, nobody's offended. I don't know. Some just jokes will do that. But I think the Mealy joke is a good, jokes are a good example.
The what?
The Liz Mealy joke.
The feminist sexual position jokes.
Because they aren't, I mean, they still may offend somebody, but they're not reinforcing the negative social context, and that's rare to find an example of.
They're not.
Yeah.
Is that because you apparently perceive that they're not?
No, because they're actually aiming at showing the disparities between these particular issues between the genders, and highlighting that not as a way of like saying, yeah, this is what should be the case. It's drawing to our attention the fact that there is this disparity. And so then we can affect the way our culture processes things. So, I don't know if there are any other questions, otherwise.
Thanks again. All right. Well, let's break for a minute, and there's coffee down the hall, restrooms down this hall, coffee's all the way. There's a break room down there, and then if you care for some snacks, there's some cookies and veggies and crackers there. And we'll come back in 3-5 minutes for the next presentation. Yeah, if you want to come around on that side. Yeah, yeah.
I came in late to the bid.
Oh, wow.
But
that must have been weird.
it was interesting. I expect this from Kazoo, right? Whatever you want to hear.
Yeah.
I'm getting a vibe of like a Lenny Bruce thing where he's bringing things out to the forefront so as to make them part of a conversation as opposed to just, okay, here's our little ball of what we talked about. I don't know if that's feels in scope or if I'm, missing a context.
So the presentation, well, we have this paper. This paper is about what's wrong with sexist humor. And it goes through all of the current sort of theories that explain or aim to explain what's wrong with sexist humor, but they're really answering the question, can our sense of humor ever be wrong? And we go through all the problems with those theories, and then we present our own view, which is aimed to sort of resolve the problem with those theories. And we found that makes for a very dry presentation. So, so we decided to create this like kind of a fake Platonic dialogue of sorts, because we're philosophers and we like Platonic dialogues. So in the dialogue, I play Feministicles and he plays Misogynistus, and he's kind of a sexist trying to explain the sort of predominant theories on humor, and I'm trying to point out problems with those theories, and then we give these jokes as sort of examples of what I'm talking about. And
is there a general theory of humor, like why people laugh?
Why does there is, and it's a really underdeveloped area of philosophy.
This is psychology too, right?
A little bit, yeah. It definitely, I think, the philosophy knows no bounds. Yeah, philosophy knows no bounds, but it's definitely like drawing on the empirical data that psychologists are gathering. And the leading theory, I think, is totally wrong, but I can tell you what it is.
What is that? Yeah.
It's called surprise theory. And the idea is that something is funny because you don't expect it. I think that's wrong for a number of reasons, mainly because not all surprises are funny.
You mean if I come out
surprise, you have cancer.
If I'm doing for example, if I'm doing a calculation and suddenly discover something new, I start laughing, that's funny.
Well, you don't find that's why you do that?
And so we think it's potentially explanatorily helpful, but it's clearly not telling the full picture. Started out as a project that was trying to do more of that, like why do we find anything funny? And that is a tough project.
Has any empirical study of humor been conducted by psychologists? Like give a whole large number of people the same joke and note what classes they're in or whatever, and try to make any sense of that?
Yes, there have been several. And it depends. Like I've seen results that like depending on certain kinds of cultural frameworks, different people will find different things funny.
And it'll depend on mood and context also, right?
Yeah. For instance, there's this thing in I think it's China. There's like a series, there's like a horror movie sort of phenomena, the way that you would probably think of like, vampires or something like that. So they're vampires, but they hop.
Yeah.
They're like hopping vampires. And when you show this to like people from Western countries,
they laugh out loud.
Laugh. It's hilarious.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
oh, it's a hopping vampire. It's
that,
terrifying if you're from the Chinese context. And so, I think there is definitely much more to humor than mere surprise. But
does every culture have humor?
I'd be a little amazed if one didn't.
Yeah.
Because it seems like it's a fairly basic human.
Well, I was wondering whether it's a basic human attribute, you might say, right?
I think
it makes me think of Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land. The character's not human until he learns to laugh. Otherwise, he's of a Martian culture, and nothing's funny. It just is.
I mean, let's be fair. It seems like both the Germans and the Russians have humor, and so if they do, I guess everybody.
See, we laughed at that. Now, I should be offended. I'm of German descent, right?
So am I.
And then the whole, borderline type thing really strikes a chord with the comedy me and my 17-year-old daughter build and exchange in our conversations. Oftentimes it ends with, "Dad, you took it too far."
Yeah.
Yeah, the generational aspects of humor are pretty interesting. I do the same thing with my dad.
Well, I don't think that's simply something that's specifically something that I'll do in a comic.
The daughter-dad relationship.
Yeah.
Okay, more coffee's brewing. And there's some tea. If anyone wants tea, there's a water heater thing down there too. So
Good deal. You are providing everything for everybody, aren't you?
I haven't quite gotten to that level yet, but
Okay, all right.
By the way.
it's a good goal.
I meant to say this at the beginning. Thanks so much for organizing everything. A lot of work that goes into it. Really appreciate it.
I thank you.
Right.
Thanks for the things.
Yeah, that made me joke.
Are you still dancing?
I don't think.
Yes, I might. We might have to.
Uncomfortable.
Are some of the tunes danceable?
Where did that come from?
As a bass player, dance, and so I don't know. It seems like they might be.
I teach ballroom dance also, so
Shocking, pretty cool.
maybe we can vote on that if anyone wants to learn a step or two or something. We can.
It's got a lot to do with happiness, doesn't it?
Sometimes it's also seeing the way that I build bonds in relationships. I always thought the same thing. Part of the problem with this is that, addressing that is.
That's right, writing everything for everybody. And there's other shows on KZO that are more like, reach out for that community program.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah, I do one. Did I say I do one too? Yeah, I do one. Oh yeah, I do a show on KZUM too. If you're not doing anything on Mondays from 11:30 a.m. to noon, I do a show called Community Matters.
Oh, cool.
So tomorrow, I have a philosopher from, I think she teaches at the University of Chicago, Candace Vogler. There's a project, it's like Virtue, Happiness, and Meaning, that she's the primary investigator for. And I think one of the central tenets of their work is looking at the relevancy of Thomas Aquinas to contemporary pursuits. Aquinas, yes, he's, as a philosopher relating to the last presentation, he saw humor as a virtue that one should cultivate in life, or playfulness, and went so far to say that if you don't have enough of it, that's a sin. So it's the first time I've heard of like a philosopher theologian saying not enough humor is a sin. Usually, historically, if you look, it's more the other way, that there's not mention of that side of it, but there is that things can get over the top, and so it's too much is seen as a sin. But yeah, okay. Candace Vogler tomorrow, 11:30 to noon. Okay, well, so when I was learning about the field of positive psychology, there is a directory of researchers that I found online located at various universities around the world. On that list, I saw Dick Deenspear, and one thing led to another, and Dick has been kind of a regular contributor to events that we put on. He was one of the speakers at the Happiness Lincoln event in 2014, and his research, the way that I take it is he looks at the positive outcomes that can come from stress, if at the real academic level, or maybe just the positives that can come from challenges. And his research has gone in several directions, one of them being into mindfulness and meditation. But whatever you want to talk about, I always enjoy hearing you, Dick. So it's all, floor is yours. So.
Thank you for inviting me.
Normally, I'm on the University Speakers Bureau, and I give one of the talks that I give when people ask for it is called Building Resistance to Stress and Aging, which is based on a book that I published a couple of years ago. And when I do that, I always use PowerPoints. And you know what PowerPoints are not to enlighten audiences, but to keep speakers on track. I have here my PowerPoints from that talk, and I'm going to use them to keep me on track. What I want to talk about are the things, first of all, a little bit about some of the problems from stress and aging and how they affect brain and so forth, because clearly happiness and well-being are antidotes to that sort of problem. And also clearly, when we talk about the neurochemistry, neural structures that are affected by things like stress and aging, in various ways they're affected exactly in opposite directions by experiences that lead to happiness, by experiences that are particularly nurturing. So, you know, everything from hugging to orgasm to petting the cat are all associated with some of the changes in neurochemistry that in turn eventually lead to genetic changes. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute, which in turn lead to changes in brain structure and neurochemistry. So it's all a very complex sort of area, and I'll start kind of at the beginning by thinking a little bit about the brain with you, because I'll be referring to the prefrontal cortex, the area that's sort of above our eyes and at the front of the brain, where we do most of our executive processing, problem solving, fluid intelligence, as examples of what I mean by executive processing. And the other area that is important for us is the hippocampus. The hippocampi, because there's two of them, one on each side. They begin kind of at the midline of the brain, kind of halfway back, and extend out towards the ears. And this is where our episodes of memory get consolidated. So when we're remembering an event like coming to Nick's celebration of a day of happiness, we remember what it was like. We remember the room a bit. We remember Nick, because Nick is Nick. And we remember some of the things that we learned. But generally, we remember it as an episode. So if there's smells and sights and auditory stuff associated with it, it all gets consolidated in the hippocampi and then sent out to other areas of the brain for storage. The visual components, for example, will get sent out to the visual parts of the cortex, which is way in the back of the brain, and so forth. Later on, when we remember this episode, these memories get reassembled. The components of the memory get reassembled in the hippocampi, and then we have a rich memory. Stress. Stress, of course, has some hormonal components. Cortisol is a major stress hormone in humans. Adrenaline is multifaceted and does all kinds of good things as well as bad. And I think it gets misinterpreted as a stress hormone too often, because it also gets elicited in great quantity when you're feeling really happy or excited about something. But cortisol doesn't. Cortisol is associated with feeling some distress. It's a hormone that keeps us from deteriorating at some cost. It tends to shut down expensive systems like reproduction and digestion and other things that are, in the long-term sense, quite vital to our existence. But it does that in order that we have some short-term survival in a potentially very dangerous situation. One of the things that happiness and well-being do is they in various ways put a lid on both the amount of cortisol that our bodies can generate and do generate. And also they put a lid on the number, the sheer quantity, the density of receptors for the cortisol, so that the cortisol has less impact on us than it otherwise might. So stress tends to degrade our brains because cortisol is one of those molecules that can cross what's called the blood-brain barrier, which means get into the brain fluid itself, the cerebrospinal fluid. And it affects the way the brain functions by speeding some areas up and making other areas more sensitive and so forth. But because it activates areas of the brain greatly, especially the hippocampus, the overactivation tends to cause some decline in neural structure. And after a while, there's an actual deterioration in the brain that's visible in brain scans that results from suffering extensive or chronic stress, or stress that's just too intense to handle for any long time period. So you expect, for example, to see smaller hippocampi in the brains of, say, military people who have suffered PTSD in combat. And indeed, that expectation is met by brain scans that show that sort of thing. So stress is a way of causing brain deterioration. But the frontal lobes, the prefrontal cortex, also tends to suffer greatly from stress. Similarly, from cortisol and the downstream impacts in the brain of cortisol. And whenever there's damage and shrinkage in the prefrontal area of the brain, then we solve problems a lot less well. All our executive functions begin to decline. And it's one of those things that you see with people as they age, as well as the memory deficits that are caused by hippocampal deterioration as we age. So stress and aging have not identical, but damned similar impacts on the brain and cause very, very similar forms of damage, both especially in the area of the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex. Stresses and aging are mean customers. So, I said a few moments ago that some of these things that happen to us with stress and aging, for example, change the way our genes function. But the good things that we can do, the things that toughen us, the things that build resistance to the decline caused by stress and aging, those good things also result from genes being activated or deactivated in ways that are different from the way we used to think about genes. We used to think about our genetic inheritance as sort of the basic plan for building brain and body, and that our life's experiences thereafter provided modifications to brain and body. And that's right, as far as it goes. But the interesting thing, the thing that's really fascinating and new, is that the way in which those life experiences, whether they be encounters that make us happy or that cause a great deal of stress, they affect brain and body by changing the way our genes function. In the short term, they create a change in the sorts of chemicals that turn genes or activate genes. I was going to say turn genes on, but activate is probably a better term. When genes get activated, they produce proteins, and the proteins change the structure of whatever the proteins are affecting. So the genes in your brain are going to respond quite differently than the genes in your blood cells, for example, when you experience stress, in part because different ones are in play in the brain than in the blood cells. That's something you all remember from basic biology, that every cell has a full complement of genes. But in a magical sort of way, only a very small portion of the genes in, say, your brain neurons are activatable, that is, play any kind of role in the way in which those neurons change shape and structure and so forth. And all the rest, the ones that have to do with blood, bone, and toenails, all the rest are not activated in those neurons, or not activatable. If I get involved in regular exercise, one of the things that happens is that the way my genes function begins to change in a long-term way as well as in a short-term way. It's not just that an episode of exercise will cause some genetic activation, which will cause some proteins to be generated and some structural change. But over the long run, if I keep on doing it day after day after day, I change the sensitivity of those genes to anything that would cause short-term activation. There's a new science called epigenetics, which describes in part how this happens. It's that some big molecules get produced, for example, in the context of stress, that grab hold of areas of our genes that they know to grab hold of and literally stop them from functioning. And those molecules can hang on for your entire life. So, for example, if you are abused as a child, severely and continuously, the genes that produce the receptors for cortisol get changed. They get modified so they become more or less sensitive depending upon where they are, where the receptors are. Cortisol sensitivity generally changes. There are some genes that that produce complex chemicals in the brain called neurotropins. You're used to the term neurotransmitter, but neurotropin is like a growth hormone, but operating in the neural system. There's some genes that produce neurotropins in the brain that literally get constrained by these giant molecules of a methyl group sort of molecule. That constraint lasts across a lifetime so that these growth hormones that act on the brain never get produced in the quantity they would have been had this child not been severely and continuously abused. And as a result, we have a human being who's going to grow up never being as smart, never having the brain development that human being would have had that person not gone through those childhood experiences. So now let's turn attention to the counter to that, especially the counter that's associated with life satisfaction and happiness and so on, and affection and so forth. When I give this lecture in a different context, I usually start by talking about how regular exercise influences the brain. And it does. It changes the way the brain functions in lots of ways that are based upon the way it changes the functioning of genes and the sensitivities of genes. Similarly, if you were involved rather continuously in mentally challenging activities, I mean, if you came, for example, to conferences on happiness in the middle of a Sunday afternoon, that kind of mental stimulation in the long term also changes the way genes function in the brain and causes some brain development. Let me digress and tell you about my very favorite study in this vein, in brief, to sort of illustrate it. Done with German medical students, published about almost 10 years ago now. Great study. And it's just one of a series that looks at the same sorts of things. So it's not as if there's one study that shows this. Med students are second-year med students. They're facing an exam called the Physicum, which they're going to have to pass in order to continue on in med school. This is at the end of their second year. Scares the crap out of them, to put it mildly. 3 months before the exam is scheduled, MRIs, brain scans done on the brains of these young people, There's a control group of college students who similarly experienced brain scans, various areas of the brain actually being measured for how big they are, the volume of the structures, especially of the areas around the hippocampi and some of the frontal areas. 3 months later, they take the exam, brains are scanned again. 3 months after the exam, brains are scanned again. There are about 30, 35 people in each of the med student group and the control group. It's a pretty adequate supply of people. During the 3-month period between the time of the first brain scan and the exam, the hippocampi actually grow. They expand in volume, and so do areas in the cortex. It's not that new neurons are being added on to cause all that growth, but the way neurons are structured with these dendritic branches that are huge branching structures that receive impulses that then activate the neuron's body. Those branches expand and extend. So more and more contacts, more and more synapses form between neurons, and the brain essentially looks bigger when you do a scan. Both cortical areas and the areas around the hippocampi grow in that 3-month period. In the 3-month period from the time the exam is done to the aftermath scan, hippocampi continue to grow, suggesting that there's some really long-term impact from that very intense study. And remember, this is in contrast to using a control group of college students who are also using their brain and learning stuff and so on and so forth, just not in this intense sort of way. So study, intense study, and there's a lot of evidence about things like learning new languages, learning to play music, musical instruments, such as some of you do. All those things tend to be really highly stimulating. Nurturance is one of those things that doesn't. You know, in the first place it began to show up, the creatures became immensely depressed, unhappy, and incapable really of expressing and enjoying nurturance. Was all the terrible studies that were done with animals. And a lot of you probably remember from your basic psych course Harry Harlow's famous monkeys. He left them alone. Some of them were, quote, raised by a cloth mother, remember, a little on a wire frame, a terracloth cloth, and the monkeys could cling to the terracloth mom. And they did better if they had a soft mother than if they had a wire mother. We humans similarly do better with a soft mother than a wire one, I'm sure. But, you know, at the time, you know, Harlow and gang were discovering what people who worked with rodents, of course, already knew in spades. And you notice how diligently I'm using mine. And that brains tended to shrink and that mental capacities tended to decline in response to that level of stress. But one of the more interesting things is that capacity for affection declined as well. And these creatures, when the females became pregnant and had their own kids, they tended to be really, really poor parents, to not have any idea of how to give affectionate, nurturing gestures and how to respond to them as well. And I'll start with a different animal model. Folks who are really interested in this got real interested in voles, because voles are field mice. You know, I've got some that live under my studio in my house right now as we speak. They make little tracks under the snow and mess up the grass, but generally, I mean, they're not terrible. I like them. There are some voles. There's some voles that are called prairie voles that live in our neck of the woods here, that bond for life. And take good care of the kids, and the males and females stay together for life and so forth. And there's others that are from the further west, up in the highlands, the high plains, called montane bulls, which I think is a perversion of mountain, but I don't know. The montane bulls, they don't bond at all. They just have sex and wander off in different directions, and they don't spend any time, there's not even an exchange of phone numbers. And, it's all just, goodbye. And the females are as comfortable with that as the males. So what's going on? Well, people, because these two very similar species have these very different bonding patterns, began to look at the brains and notice that oxytocin, this wonderful hormone that's associated with love making, with petting the cat, with just feeling warm and happy and nurturing. Oxytocin and oxytocin receptors were really deficient in the montane bulls, in those that didn't bond. And so the thinking was, well, maybe we humans are the same in the sense that we differ. We different people from each other in how well we respond to affection and how happy we are in response to bonding kinds of activities and so forth. And maybe things like oxytocin and other hormones associated, like the endorphins, which you know some about, like dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter, which of course is associated with pleasure and addiction and so forth. These things all form systems where the endorphins are evoked in the brain, literally released in the brain by oxytocin. And in turn, both of those neurochemicals, we can call them either hormones or neurochemicals, doesn't matter, play some role in evoking dopamine, in feeling good, in feeling happy, in feeling nurturing, and so forth. So anyway, it turns out that if you take some oxytocin and you blow it up people's noses, literally blow it up their noses, put it in some sort of a little aspirator, and of course the control group, or the same people later as their own control, get something blown up their nose that is a placebo essentially. You blow up some oxytocin in people's noses and they feel warmer, more nurturant. They like people's faces better, and they're more trusting. Now, they're not, there's a wonderful article in the Journal of Personality and Social Psych about 2 years ago, says essentially the title of which was Oxytocin Makes People Feel More Affectionate but Not More Trusting Towards Untrustworthy People. And obviously the title wasn't that long, but what it essentially says was, it doesn't make you subject to scumbags to have a good oxytocin sort of response in body, but it does affect the way your nurturance, your feelings of nurturance and happiness and so forth. So whenever we encounter an affectionate relationship, and often a lot of what we think of with happiness has to do with affection and bonding and nurturant relationships, because I would argue that literally nothing makes us more content and happy than the social relationships that we have. And as people get older, you hear old geezers like me saying that more and more and more with age, that it's these friendships and close relationships that are really what make life feel good, that lead to happiness and good feelings and so forth. So all those things, the oxytocin, the endorphins, the dopamine, get elicited with affectionate behavior. And when we grow up, not in that stressful environment that Harry Harlow created for his poor monkeys, but when we grow up in an environment where we are well nurtured, it does change the way our genes function. And we do have more of those neurotropins that foster brain development. So we actually have smarter kids if we have kids that are well nurtured. And we have happier kids if we have kids who are well nurtured, because the sheer quantity of receptors for things like estrogen in the body and oxytocin are enhanced by that early nurturing. So one of the keys to happiness is having a good start. It doesn't mean you can't be a really happy person without a good start, but it means that probably you're a little different on that happiness dimension than you would have been otherwise. So, said way more than I need. Questions, thoughts, additions, corrections?
How long did the sniffing of oxytocin take to induce the effect?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm going to guess that probably in this type of study it'd be 15, 20 minutes. One of the complexities, though, of this is oxytocin, when it's delivered, a lot of it comes straight out of the hypothalamus in the brain. But when it's delivered into the body, it can't cross the blood-brain barrier. It's a big molecule. And so somehow, even though it's been blown up people's noses, and it cannot directly get into the brain, it still affects the way the brain is functioning. And that's one of those little, what's going on between this and that we don't know a lot about.
I was going to say half ingested a couple of shots of Jack Daniels makes me more likely to be friendly and so forth too. But does that cross the blood-brain? Does alcohol go across the blood?
Oh, it certainly does.
Okay, well,
Oh, yeah.
maybe that explains it.
Big time.
So you talked about epigenetic factors, and if I understand these correctly, they actually can have cross-generational effects.
Yeah.
So those good starts for, like, say, parents and grandparents and vice versa, do they also have impacts on the way this works?
Yeah.
In these particular types of cases?
Good for you. Yes, absolutely right. One of the things that is so surprising is that when these epigenetic changes happen, they can affect the genes that get into sperm. They can't affect the genes that get into the eggs, but they do affect those that get into sperm. You know, we humans are typical mammals, and when human girls are born, they have all the eggs in their body that they will ever have.
Right.
And so the genes in those eggs are just kind of stabilized, and they do not get changed as a result of the woman's experiences. But we guys are producing sperm like every second.
Right.
And
so they're stabilized from the grandmother's perspective on there from the mother.
Yeah, but when a woman's let's take the woman who's experiencing a lot of stress. Her response to stressors when she is pregnant are likely to be more extreme because she's not as stress tolerant, having been overexposed to uncontrollable stress in her past. If her, given that, her responses to stressors while she's pregnant are more extreme. She has a lot more cortisol. Cortisol can affect the fetal development and affect the fetal development very much in the same direction as excess cortisol in you or me as an adult. If it's sustained too long, it's going to cause brain deterioration, neurochemical stuff that shouldn't go on, and so forth. So a mother who's been, let's say, an abused child can, in an indirect way, pass on her sensitivity to stressors to her sons and daughters. But it's a different path than the path for the father, who can pass on insensitivity to stressors even if he never meets his offspring through the sperm. New stuff.
The benefits of the warm start with a nurturing environment, if that doesn't occur at some point and then it occurs later in life, at what point does that benefit taper off to become non-changeable or at least minimal? Is there like a dive to where the nurturing can begin where that'd be beneficial?
I don't think there's a single answer to that. I think it really is just kind of a slide, but very clearly it is a slide. And You see it in these kids who get adopted from like Romanian orphanages. We're pretty much done with that now, but back a decade or two ago, a lot of kids were adopted from those terrible, terrible orphanages in Romania. There were so many kids in the orphanages because Ceausescu forbade any kind of birth control. And so, you know, there were pregnancies all over the place that people didn't want for children, and the orphanages just filled up. It also caused a huge epidemic of AIDS because people weren't using condoms and so forth either. Yep.
So I guess I'm just wondering, there are certainly a lot of people who, I mean, and you hear about these stories a lot, people who didn't really want to start,
Yep.
Who managed to overcome that. I mean, you probably hear more about those stories than the ones who didn't have a want to start.
You bet.
So is there anything in your research that helps to explain what overcomes the absence of a no start?
You need a certain amount of stimulation. You know, when Nick was telling you what I think about from time to time, he said, you know, that sometimes stress can actually have a positive influence. Well, there's some really good research coming out of the University of Buffalo 5-6 years ago that essentially looks at the degree to which people have experienced stress in their childhoods. And it turns out that for stress tolerance as an adult, that the best childhood is not one free of stress by any means. It's one with a low to moderate level of problems to overcome as a kid growing up. And sometimes those problems can be mean problems, you know, bullies and stuff. But there's a couple of different avenues that explain why that's a positive sort of thing, so if you can handle it. And that's part of the if, you know. Different ones of us are born with a sort of a natural level of stress tolerance that's different from other folks. And in some sense, we've just been talking about a little bit of why that happens. Mothers and fathers and their stress and so forth. A little bit of challenge and stress to overcome means that you develop coping skills at a psychological and mental level that otherwise you might not develop. And they do prepare you. But high levels of stress are uniformly destructive, really high levels of stress. And that doesn't mean you can't be great afterwards, but it means probably not as great as you would have been. And that's another one of those things too. I mean, we see those people coming out of those awful, you know, impoverished ghetto backgrounds, where, you know, it's tough in the home, it's tough on the street, it's tough everywhere, and then they're 1 out of 100 or so turns out to be just thriving.
Yeah, they're the exception.
Yep, they're the exception. Nick, you chase me out of here whenever you want.
Okay. I'm just gonna pass something out. This is the sheet. This is kind of my idea for engaging in something in a way to challenge ourselves that hopefully is in the sweet spot for challenges that are conducive to generating brain development and further growth. So I'm plugging myself here. But
this is good.
So the idea, it's like I had a positive experience in a 12-step recovery program. So I was trying to think of like, how could I take some of the dynamics of that and like translate into something that could have these kinds of effects for anybody. So thinking about our values, setting goals based on our values, and then getting into small group conversations basically around that is the idea. And I was thinking of your work when I was developing this as intentionally challenging ourselves. So we don't want to just avoid challenge, nor do we want it so much that it's toxic, it's an effect. So I tried to create a Goldilocks thing. So this is my, this is my effort. So that's just future reference. But let's thank Dick for his presentation. Okay, we'll take a break again, and we'll have some music here when we reconvene. Whenever you guys are ready to jam. So, all right.
The balance of cortisol versus adrenaline.
Yeah.
Keep it high on adrenaline, low on cortisol.
Yeah, we'll be fine. Yeah, the bigger question is where the Johnson should be, right? Because over there. That's just shows in around.
Four chairs, too. I warmed it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Very nice. Yeah, there you go.
I really enjoyed the presentation, man. I'm doing a little article on today's event. Sounds good.
Is there a there?
It's interesting because as somebody who's like experienced childhood trauma myself, one of the started we were talking about how maybe we should never like be as good as that event. I was curious to see like
Not a single event, but living in a stressful environment.
Probably plug this in over here.
That single event thing is temporarily a problem, but one thing is
Oh, I got one. Right here.
Sure. Here? Having to do some all the time. But I mean, a single event can Sure. So I don't mean to minimize the potential for a single event. For example, a rape. Sure. A lot of people who suffer like that kind of single event, kind of that way.
so okay, so it's more or less trying to like
Bob, can I get your hand with anything?
Well,
Mostly stay out of the way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not part of my dissertation. Shane actually works on relational autonomy.
I know that. I mean, I don't.
Yeah, so it's a bit more, in his wheelhouse. And I work on race concepts. But, you know, it's definitely like
thank you so much.
it's becoming a really sort of prominent side project for us.
Oh, yeah.
Not just because, like, we wrote this paper and then there was another paper that came out of it. We're taking it on the road in late April. We got 2 conferences that we're presenting at.
You together, you'll perform?
Probably at least one of them will perform the dialogue. And the other one, we may perform the dialogue, I'm not sure.
What's that?
The dialogue is a weird thing. It's not your typical presentation style at a philosophy conference.
It's very intellectual. You have to really concentrate to keep
Yeah.
straight what's being said.
It's quite
Intense, yeah.
yeah.
There are funny,
There's
quite
some funny
humorous
bits
parts, yeah.
there. Shane, I gotta head off.
Where do you teach dancing?
My living room as of late.
Ah,
So, yeah. My latest was a couple getting ready for a wedding and learned a little rumba. So just a step beyond the sway. You know.
I've been challenged dancing. My wife and I, when the YW was downtown, there was a young lady doing ballroom dancing techniques and things, some jazz stuff. I learned jazz hands and this and that. It was great fun.
Nice.
Don't feel I have an affinity, but you know, that can be developed.
Yeah, dance is probably one of those Goldilocks level challenging activities, I'm guessing too.
I'll get you plugged in once I get this typical. I don't know how chords get tangled when they're in together, but this one. There we go.
Put this up here, so I might give a better view of the band.
You better be on, right?
Is this the last activity?
I'm going to try a short activity on friendship, and then there's a lady that's going to talk about arts in the community.
Ah. I'm gonna have to take off after the music. I want to hear these guys again.
Are you? have to know how to play.
Oh, yeah. You play good?
Mine's not hard. Yes.
You should be on there. You want?
No, do we have power to the
Speaker yet?
AC there?
No, power plug that on the house plug in. Oh, and I'm gonna plug it in. That could be helpful, right? Huh? Yeah. They just took all the cords.
Oh, yeah. I had a conversation. Are you going to want to
Okay, you plugged in. I'll go the other end, buddy.
Say,
Huh?
Well, Z is female, so we need a male side.
All in there. Yeah.
That was it.
That is, that goes right here. You got it about?
So.
All right. We should be all right. You,
I don't have any plug-in. You have a mail, that's what we're doing.
Yeah, I got it.
It's right here.
there you go.
Thank you.
Let's go.
Yes.
All right, that's good.
If anyone's looking for another activity, Nick is an organizer of a lecture series that's pretty interesting. You want to?
The lecture series, the lecture tonight is going to be on sustainability in the context of droughts and climate change, and the relationship of those things to wars, famines, things of that sort, and what we can do about it. 7 o'clock, Unitarian Church tonight.
How does someone find your schedule or?
Well, we do advertise a fifth, and this is the fifth lecture in a 5-lecture series. If you give me your email address, you will know from now on. This is the 34th annual lecture series. Thanks, Nick. Every plug is worth money. It's for free.
Plug in.
I am. We're plugged in. We couldn't figure out our chords here. If you don't mind, I'll just stay seated like I normally am standing. You all right? Okay. You guys ready?
Yes.
All right, here we go. What's that? The next one is, who's seven?
All right. I guess I should have said who you are, but I'll let you guys say who you are.
All right, yes, our name is Eldon Drive, and I wanted to introduce the band members. First of all, our first chair percussionist is Bob Huck. Jane Malley, our blues guitarist, we call him the philosopher for obvious reasons. And the heartbeat of the group is Reed Malley, our bass player. And my name is Mike Crow, that's our sax player. The first piece was Revelation by Kitty Baran. Barron, excuse me. He wrote we usually, with his piece, we usually do a poem, which we're going to do here for you next, which was Thank God for Losers. That's the name of the poem. But because this is Happiness Day, right? We felt like, okay, we couldn't make you, so we thought we'd make you more happy by doing the other poem, which we've done, which is Thanks God for Winners, because under our present administration, is about compensating winners more so that we get more winning. So we felt like we'd better make sure that we do due respect to thank God for winners. So what we're gonna do is perform a piece called Blues 7 by Sonny Rollins, and then with that we're gonna be doing the poem Thank God for Winners. Let's give thanks to winners, our worthy job creators. Who else would give us paychecks? In his infinite wisdom, God made winners out of profits, so blessings could trickle down. Winners inherit stocks, bonds, real estate, and businesses. They're American birthright. Losers get a dream at birth that enterprise and hard work could make them into winners. Winners pay lower prices, interest rates, fees, and taxes, while losers pick up the slack. Laws shield winners from redress. If losers can score in court, why would winners take on risk? It requires strong character to follow investment plans that reduce thousands of jobs. But winners must live with dread. Losers just might awaken to the burdens they carry. Losers may stop believing that winners are all-knowing, claim more of the winner's take. If winners are no longer justified by religion or favored by government, what would happen to winners? How could they line their pockets with other people's money? But winners need not worry. They must get more than losers. All part of God's creation. those winners anyway. Next one, just a tune, Mr. PC by John Coltrane. Our next piece is a poem entitled Human Nature. And again, this is dedicated to the Day of Happiness. We were digging deeply into our stuff here. But on this particular one, we wanted to highlight the fact that everybody's asking for the secret of happiness and all that. For about 100 millenniums, people did achieve a high level of happiness and affluence, actually, in their way of living. And so this particular tune we call Human Nature. And the tune is Thelonious Monk's Epistrophe. Adam and Eve, forage, eat, a lush garden spanning worldwide. Each has no rulers or subjects, owners or renters. It nuts, roots, and berries. Adam hunts buffalo at home, but she shows him no deference. Adam's hunting hits or misses, while gathering remains steadfast. Her words are heard the same as his. Eve's mother and sisters and cousins, pregnant and breastfeeding, gather while caring for young and sick and old. Adam and his kin hunt as a team, using stones, spears, savvy, and guile to kill the faster, stronger prey. One day of foraging can yield enough food for a week, providing affluence for all. When Eden yields less fruit and game, they move to new ground of plenty, awaiting nature's maker. Their stock kept to what they can carry. They make potions, clothes, tents, and tools from stones, sticks, and hides on their path. Each has special skills and knowledge contributing to group welfare. Each receives according to need. At change of seasons, all share food, tales, and wisdom around campfires, socializing with other bands. Bands need all members to survive. They avoid disputes by moving. Losses from war, the greater threat. Adam and Eve's way of living for 100 millennium forms human nature's DNA. No dog eat dog, last man standing, but we're all shared and share alike. Adam and Eve are communists. Did you know that?
Was that strong final dissonance reflecting? Or is that automatic or what?
It just happens when he says that.
Yeah, we make sure that people really felt that.
Yeah, I can't do it on my fingers anymore.
It's kind of a story goes behind that, because the first time I read that poem, and I was reading it, and it was in a situation where people just listening to the poem, there was no music. Because I'm just reading the poem, and then when I gave the last line, I kind of had my Stravinsky moment, because they all just looked at me, what the hell? I could have said 4-letter words and crap like that and got away with it, but I couldn't say they are communists. By John Coltrane. The next one, again, we're going to bring out a poem here that reflects happiness. This one we are doing with commemoration of the question, where are you? And basically, when you have this kind of social disruption or something, we're asking the question, where are you? And the question of where are you is, where are you, Robin Hood? Right? People are asking that question. So we have a poem dedicated to that, and we do it with the tune by Thelonious Monk, Blue Monk.
It's okay, I can't read it.
That was just like a PowerPoint.
Yeah, it's fine.
We're trying to make it feel good though. By having
Yeah, I pretend I know how to read it, they could use it from me.
Beautiful. Robin Hood, where do you roam today? We look for you to no avail, to save us from the fray. We hope that your legend is true, for Prince John rules the realm, to make himself and cronies rich, while Richard's off the helm. Your character, beyond review, aside from Norman zone, esteemed among all the Saxons, your qualities well known. Loyal to Richard Lionheart, while he's on God's crusade, slashing Islamic terrorists with his shining steel blade. scorn the sheriff of Nottingham for police brutality, while enacting Prince John's decrees that lack morality. Rouse the many protest movements that Saxon lives matter, asking questions or shooting first, Normans do the latter. Break with the attire of Blue Bloods for that of Lincoln Green, to blend within Sherwood Forest so as not to be seen. Although you love your merry band, you are of noble blood, making you first among equals, but no stick in the mud. Chivalrous towards Maid Marian, she's more than your toy. Tolerance of feminist wiles, but not a mommy's boy. Despise the church that bribes the poor to enter heaven's gate. But Friar Tuck is down to earth. His faith carries more weight. Is it true what's said about you, that you give to the poor by robbing from the filthy rich, while staying staunch and pure? We have looked high and low for you, hoping your myth is true. So far you've covered your tracks well. No one knows whom you're with. Oh, Robin Hood, where do you roam today? We look for you to no avail, to save us from the fray. Okay. We'll close this out with Blue Train by John Coltrane. join me at 3:30.
Cool, yeah. All right, let's do Belgian driving. Okay. We'll take a break while they. Yeah, come back together.
Copy down the hall if anybody. What's that?
Yeah.
I hate to get the bug out on you, but mosquito.
Yeah, you get that.
Shane, do you play?
Usually, like, host the
No,
speakers if they're.
by improvisation.
We try to, yeah, this one's in town, so it's, yeah, we do.
I mean, I joke, I can functionally, I could probably figure out what it is.
Climate change and all the stuff. we
What I do have on there are like things to
Wars,
remind me of the heat.
water disasters.
And I just, there, I got another one.
Kind of all comes together. All right, well,
Thank you.
I want to be there. I can sign
Going before you.
Will power myself.
Well, after this, yeah, I know what you Later.
I mean, a lot of it for me, people do it like, but it works. I mean, and people do what they do, frankly.
Recite without feeling like.
Because we all kind of like it happens.
You know, we always screwed up around times.
When are you going to perform?
It's an okay, you know.
So, we're looking at performing.
And you know, you're just in your own.
I think 17 Mondays or maybe.
Well, sure, just to.
Accordingly, there were other places on the list.
Yeah, we're often comfortable.
Essentially, but I think they've got one.
Well, I mean, I've been walking into your basement, see up your drums, and I've been moving, they do the same thing. So even now, I go, oh, I like that. So
Very good.
This is a piece of our gig.
Things that don't make a lot of difference, but they're just.
We, tonight's poems will also have a slideshow.
Yeah, I saw the one at the church, Unitarian Church visit more than a year ago now.
Yeah.
For which he took a lot of shit.
That's actually what got me into the band. Both the Unitarians were upset.
Which shocked me. I was about.
We didn't get that either.
Nice job, guys. Really, very good.
You had heard a couple of those.
Yeah.
You just heard, you heard Human Nature and the
Human nature, love human nature. I mean, yeah, you know what.
It's one of our gold moments.
Even if our nature is to kill each other most of the time.
That wasn't though. I keep telling you that.
Yeah, I know. Don't we wish, Mike?
It wasn't that way.
Yeah.
In our department, no, it's just the two of us. And we're right now, we've written 3 different papers that are going to conferences. The one we did with Catholic last year.
That sort of sprung out of nowhere.
Kind of, well, it was Chelsea and this other colleague of ours who dropped out of this. Now I want to work on the project together. We're going to work on the project.
Yeah, I think that's good to do that. Yeah, to have more cooperation in research.
It should be, yeah, it motivates things differently and makes you think about things. And the other thing, we all have different strategies.
Stuck to the car.
So, yeah, those 3 papers, we're trying to do full ideas from them, submit them to, policy papers for a book chapter as well as some of this due in a couple months. So it's all kind of hopefully leading to that.
Thought we had, well, it's very interesting phenomenon at SGL.
It's very interesting. A little less. I think people do it.
And it might be the nice one, I didn't, I wanted to Microsoft.
Maybe I wasn't up close enough to think of it.
But you know, we're right here.
Yeah, I didn't think it was, I wasn't worried as much.
Supposed to.
Someplace else.
That's your speaker.
About 6:30 then, Dennis?
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Did you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I just didn't know.
Oh, and it wasn't too loud. I was worried it might be too loud, but it wasn't, you know, like, could hear you.
Okay.
It's rather an intimate setting, you know?
Yeah.
I suppose you could only crank those amplifiers up and blow them away if you wanted to, right?
Yeah, we could.
I mean, technically, that's a practice amp, but it's a really.
Well, it was pleasantly different than other performances around town in the bars, for example,
Yeah.
where all I can sense is my lungs blowing back and forth, and
Yeah.
I hear nothing. I mean, this,
Well, some musicians.
I don't know what the
realize-
deal is with that.
Well,
Loudness is king. I mean,
It's because some musicians come to realize that sound is a physical thing. Demonstrate that to you.
well, it's power, got a power over to sonicate your brain.
That's something. No, I mean, there is actually a plausible reason to do it at certain points or up to certain volumes. So each amp has kind of a sweet spot where you need to get at least to that volume to get it to really.
Yeah, well, and there was a point there at the end of that one where,
Where I started getting rid of
you know, I got a little, that was great. I thought that was a great end.
Yeah, I mean,
It was very, very memorable end.
They play loud enough, maybe they can suppress or whatever, express your genes.
Express.
Yeah, it could be a
Express them out of yourself.
You know, off the top of your head, you're talking about positive journalism. Do you know some like resources I can go to look at that offhand?
Yeah, there's a graduate program at the University of Pennsylvania. And they have a few of the projects that people have done to do that on. One, I think it's constructive journalism, then the other is positive media.
Okay.
Those are the two that come to mind. One of the things I've noticed in other media outlets is that they'll have a page dedicated to like health and well-being. So, and let's see, the Times, New York Times, and Washington Post, I know are two that do for sure. Like, if you're interested in like examples of how they cover health and well-being.
We know very well how they cover ill-being. It's almost dead.
Yeah. I can tell you a little bit about one that I remember. There's a finding in the work of Daniel Kahneman that when the way that we process experiences, memory and emotion, like what we remember, if you're trying to convey a memorable experience, the way that our brains work best, if you want people to remember it, is like whatever the peak of the experience was, plus however it finishes. Like our brains kind of average out the peak and the end. So one of the studies that looked at narratives that were, or like articles by journalists that were constructed in that way, they tried different formats where all the articles presented the same information, nothing different, content-wise, but they structured the articles by these various theories of like how do you have the biggest positive impact or make an article the most memorable, and that one seemed to have the biggest like positive effect on people emotionally. Like it was kind of like, I think they chose something that could be like a downer for a topic, but they tried to structure it in a way where they like, oh, and here are people like at the end of the article like working on solutions to this problem. Here's some examples of progress being made. Compared to ones in different formats, I guess that the way that the stories are structured can have an emotional impact on the audience. That's a variable that's in your hands as journalists.
I know, it's really weird being like the trying to find like how to project somebody's voice and opinion without like objectively using your own. And it's like
it's unavoidable. Like whatever frame you use is gonna have some impact.
So it's all about balance, I suppose.
Yeah. All right. I'll grab this table. And, yeah.
Did you say you were recording?
I'm with the LNK News.
This is the no, LNK.
We're a brand new startup. We just started publishing a couple months ago. Yeah.
Okay. You're publishing what?
We're publication online and paper as well. You can find us at most coffee shops.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
And LNK.
Oh yeah. I actually just was here 2 months ago. I did a story on Casey Webb, and then I got to talk to Sharon and
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, and Ryan, got to meet all of them. It's really cool. My goal is to sort of like illuminate topics that I feel like don't get enough representation, or that are like valuable to community building. So, events like this, I think, are really good towards increasing like cohesion with people and like bringing people together. And so I try to like paint things in that sort of perspective.
Did you tell, what's your name?
Riley Hubbard.
Riley, did you tell Riley about the Friday meetups? He might want to come and report on that. At Indigo Ridge, we meet on Friday at noon to have a discussion about anything that comes up with a group of persons who just happen to show up.
That's cool.
At that company shop. Do you know that?
Indigo Ridge, yeah, for sure. What time do you guys usually go there?
12 o'clock on Friday.
Yeah, there's kind of a
Regular little group, if you're talking
if
about
you're ever
substantive issues of the day, you might say.
Cool.
It'll be a lunch rush.
Yeah, it's not really that much of a rush. I mean, you're right.
Yeah.
No, it's everybody's welcome. I assume that's true, but
Yeah. The official
any confidences there in mind?
The official Positivity Matters meetup is Fridays noon to 1 at Indigo Ridge Books. So this idea of well-being is loosely held in the background as conversation just kind of emerges.
That's cool.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I thought loneliness and friendship might make for a good section for today's event. So the experience of social isolation can be objectively described as like not having contact with other people. But there's the subjective experience of social isolation, whether or not there's other people around, would just be called loneliness. So it seems to be this, the loneliness element that maybe due to some of those mechanisms that Dick Deanspear was talking about earlier has a detrimental effect on life expectancy. So some research indicates that chronic unwanted loneliness is as detrimental to our life expectancy as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, or another analogy would be it's I think it's a like obesity of about 100 pounds or something has a similar effect on reducing life expectancy as chronic unwanted loneliness. So those are in public health. Usually the emphasis is put on like the smoking and obesity typically, but there's just as much evidence that if we were to focus on social connectedness, that could have a similar impact in reducing, in elevating life expectancy and enhancing the quality of life and focus on loneliness. So these might not be the most intuitive approaches to health and well-being, but that's kind of something that I stumbled across. So as a rough, so what's the solution to loneliness, basically? And like friendship, as you know, just to call it one thing, I would say it's just friendship, basically, that's the solution. So what I thought was we might do somewhat of a little bit of a brainstorming type activity. So if you're willing to play along, I've got a series of interactions that we'll engage in here. So, okay, step one, just pair up with someone in the room that you don't know. So, yeah, so we actually just move around so you can sit by someone that you don't know for a second here, and then I'll give further instructions. So.
Makes it easy.
Yeah.
Hello, Dennis.
So I'm just going to guide us through some interactions here.
Well, that's fine.
And
I have to go to more anyway, so.
That's what I'm gonna be.
Okay. So we'll just go through each, that's okay?
Okay, yeah.
That's cool that,
Okay, so here's the activity. So think about a person who had a lasting positive impact on your life. A friend, a parent, a teacher, or anyone. So call to mind such a person. And then with your interlocutor, describe that person and how they had a positive impact on your life. So that's the start. So yeah, we'll go like a couple minutes. So I'll just say switch, and then
I would say
switch here. Ideally,
You're gonna make us less lonely by
So we're all just gonna Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So we're supposed to say what is that positive impact on our life? Mine and why. Mine is my father's great.
Primary school. I don't know how to really answer these.
Had very good
The super I have the mind is.
was always a giver to other people. And even when you
I noticed when I started,
just the work ethic and love and each other is always which can also be a negative sometimes. That's someone who wants to
so really
No, your thoughts.
information that you can tell when I was using an interest board. And, sort of dialogue. Really think the more they can be interested.
Did you do that? So you're trying to get me to avoid doing it? I was gonna ask you to do it at some point. So we didn't have positive, where are we? Last year.
Yeah. Last year,
It's always good to have people in your life who push like positive.
very loving.
Like a person that impacted me, she's a good friend of mine. I've known her since high school. So, you know, it was interesting. You know, growing up in school, there's sort of this like, it's just this environment where people are growing up and they're not so sure of themselves, so they tend to like project their insecurities on other people, you know, and then it creates this sort of, well, you know, am I good enough for this person? And sort of this like detrimental mindset. And she was kind of like the first person I ever met who was unconditional with their positivity. You know, like didn't necessarily like didn't hold judgments against people, and sort of like helped me to understand that, you know, acceptance of another person is also unconditional. Like you can't like hold people's like, oh, that person you know isn't good at math, or you know, whatever it is, like that's weird, like yeah, exactly. And so it's really, I mean, she's still a good friend of mine, and it's really carried over and helped me recognize not only people, but their competitors. And so I really appreciate having been able to speak really like push me beyond like my sort of like microcosm of high school drama and you know, all that nonsense. So,
Back in 70.
Okay, maybe like a minute more, or are you in the middle of it, or kind of? Okay.
I think similar to your comment under the courage to me to empathize. You guys have several meetings. He said
That's the flip side of that. It's not a happiness.
What's that? Yeah.
Well,
I
don't know, maybe I'd have like agreements with somebody, and I would say, you know, oh, like I'm gonna pay them back and everything back, and she'd be like, you know, it's not necessary. It's just going to like continue this cycle of perpetual negativity, and just sort of like conflict is something I've like a difficulty of mine to deal with. I'm not good at being right. And so like she sort of helped me realize that it doesn't necessarily doesn't, like, for example, my old roommate still has
so I would say that, you know,
kind of like
relationship.
like screwed me over right before I moved out, you know. So,
It's hard.
you know, I was thinking like, well, you know, I'm gonna go over there, and she was like, doesn't have to be that way. You know, there's a way to retrieve that without having to.
Okay. So now we'll give things like a slight twist and give it a level of abstraction. So now thinking about these people, if you can abstract from those experiences the qualities that sort of had that, the qualities that they demonstrated that had that positive impact on you. So if you were to list their attributes, courage or something like that, or their love, whatever it happens to be, like try to pull out some of those concepts that those people lived. And if you have a pen or paper, maybe jot down the words come to mind about those people. Or if you need a pen, like.
His comes up there with, which got me there. I don't know about it. I am again experiencing, which I got married also, so I had many experiences. The concept of loneliness, or even, and it had that feeling. I mean, it was a very profound. But I didn't have a lot of. I had friends, basically. Like you are scripting. And then I never experiencing it until. Now, so even though I go do it, like I said, so I would say one is certainly the issues related to right now security and talking about how do we have parties and how do we have parts of folks that they need to change their
I think when I think of my grandma, it's funny because I remember her being very loving and awesome, but it wasn't necessarily that I remember any conversations about her being nice to people or really even having a lot of great conversations. So there is, a symbol of love or a feeling of love or like physical touch associated with
See, my father was very,
recognition and appreciation, I think, like I said earlier, like being able to recognize somebody else's humanity, and also being able to like appreciate things without expecting something. I grew up in a very, I was raised it's like, oh, I need something in exchange for my goods and services, like monetization. Right, and so she sort of like taught me to, instead of like doing things out of self-gratification, doing it for like shared gratification, like using like this bond between people as a point of positivity rather than
actually no more
so it kind of drives my mission in life is sort of to have a singular mission. It's like to bring people together. I want to increase cohesion, do the communication, things like that. So it was it's really eye-opening. There's a lot.
Okay, is that, did everyone get a chance to share a little bit on that? Okay, so you guys are a slightly bigger group, so I'm gonna combine these two pairs here to the next level of abstraction. And that is like keeping those qualities in mind. And if you wanna, if this next phase brings up any more qualities or other dynamics, feel free to add on to what you've already found. Maybe here, take a moment to just share the qualities that jumped out at you. So the next one is brainstorm / write down what you believe are the main ingredients that help friendship form, develop, and be repaired.
Here you go.
All right. Brainstorming them, yeah.
How do you mean, the pairs of us?
The group can take on that.
Which group?
Like,
the whole?
You four right there.
We four here.
We are group.
Okay.
What helps? Yeah, what helps friendship form?
Well, like, not necessarily
What helps friendship form, develop,
friendship? Number one, meet up somewhere and actually say hi. I'm so-and-so and yours.
develop that.
Time to get it.
Be in a relationship or
Okay,
attention
so.
to it.
Okay.
Especially
Show it loving kindness.
doing something that we all agree confers some value.
Operating something.
And being
Yeah.
and those are the folks the hello, how they would people chat at the
My
coffee.
first time you say it, I thought it
There's something that's the usual, hi, how you doing?
I think especially when you like really get to know somebody, you recognize their vulnerabilities. And I think one thing that helps to maintain those friendships is to help them through that instead of being
Relationships when we're young.
instead of like holding that against or like over their head, you know, being like, well, this is something we can both like learn from and move on.
It would be a big trust issue. So they should exploit that. It's like,
Yeah.
And if we were
there's
to
trust that also.
be with that particular
Once you
person,
recognize that.
feel that we were very disconnected and we had a relation that was very shallow. So my question is, you know, one of the things that I found in the group was that a lot of they were more associated with the crucial than they
We're here and there.
Because it was easy to work with. Now, there are some that continue, you know,
As well as it's repair.
and I think it's because as they mature together, they're buying more commonality, relationship, more they nurture the same interests. They have relationships that they share, there's more of a network of people that they share. You think?
I do, I also think we still from the same years. I think it's interesting to look at my husband and I went to it's not very large. My husband was real people, very small. So, you know, I don't know how I feel about this, but it's interesting watching these, you know, just the other night and you and a couple, even
Mm-hmm.
it's, and they just need a much more loving, kind, and friendly than the ones I went to high school. Like, if it's a simple, maybe hi on Facebook, or, you know, nobody cares anymore. Or the people that you work on your 20, and it's like people that you never had things in common with now, you realize 20 years later. You know what I mean? So I don't know, we talked about it, but it's like, even though you feel.
What am I doing or something?
Yeah.
I love that
Exclusive, having
interaction with
small,
him, kind of, there's not much time.
pretty much go through everything together,
Oh, yeah.
you know, and maybe
And you know,
that's
one thing I
why it
noticed
is.
in my
that they're
generation
more
is like,
close-knit and
a lot of people will go to these social events
I
or
don't
what
know, I
have you,
find it
and
very
just be on the phone.
interesting.
And it's like, well, if you're going to go somewhere, you can just sit at home and be on your phone. Like, if you're going to go somewhere, you should be there to interact. To me, I need to. It's ridiculous.
I have friends
Together.
that, when I was
And the best
16,
I
I
think
moved
was back when
away,
there were two constantly.
and I go back and I
Parallel
see them. And even though we don't
together,
necessarily have.
but they're doing different things.
They're more comfortable.
It's gotta be the benefit.
Than
Yeah.
even some friends who,
Yeah,
but I know now.
seriously.
For the reasons like all that downhill stuff that you did, you know, they know all that, but yet it's like they're some sort of a family, you know, rather than kind of you're not related.
Yeah. All right. Does anyone still have an idea cooking or another minute or?
No, we got actually. Okay, yeah, we got.
Knowing whether you want to, yeah.
Started out with oxygen, they can oxygen.
Yeah, that's obvious.
Okay.
No, yeah, we're gonna-
I know.
The thing we mentioned is one of the things that's defined in society is the emotional relationships. In other words, there's something more to that person. And you can actually tell if you have good potential or something you want to discuss or doing it together. The problem is for most people that means is the only fewer and fewer people that are on the
Right.
great to see.
Everybody's busy in their own life.
It's not like, okay, yeah, we got 100 Facebook. But it really doesn't.
Right, yeah, right, yeah.
Okay,
Exactly.
so,
What are we doing now?
yeah, now we'll report out, I guess, as it were, so, I guess to everybody, I'll try to write these down as, okay, what did people come up with for how ingredients to help friendships form, develop, and repair?
Communication.
Okay.
Put down TAL rather than write everything out. Time, attention, listening to each other. You know what I mean. Mm-hmm. It's your turn. You have the next.
Oh, okay. Common interest.
We had the same thing. Very good. Connected with common interest is this idea of perhaps cooperation to achieve a goal that both parties of the friendship desire.
Shared
We're
goals.
going too fast? Okay, shared goals. That's right.
Shared, well, I've written it kind of funny, so I'm just gonna reword it. So a shared network of people.
Friends of friends of friends. What we mean by that is friends of friends of friends. We have, that we're interconnected, yeah, we have similar people that are interconnected.
Trust. To promote intimacy, compassion. We also had forgiveness in the event of some sort of stress on the relationship or breakdown, you might say.
All you know.
Oh, well. Well, Shane came up with the growth factors and interadaptability that is, as the friendship inevitably evolves, right? The people change. I think that change.
They change
Ways
to adapt to each other.
We could keep it to syllables less than 8. Sometimes we can't.
You guys, is that something we talked about over here, which I think that you guys solved with this problem, that it's funny, like you have your friends in high school and so forth, but a lot of them you don't have anymore.
Yeah.
And the reason you don't is because of that interadaptability. They go their way, you went yours.
Yeah.
If you go back to a reunion and talk to them, you don't even know what you're talking about.
Right.
I mean, besides, or, what about those Huskers? There's nothing really.
Right. Or they bring up something that happened 20 years ago.
Yeah. You remember when we threw bricks through the store window, whatever? Wasn't that fun? Those are my kind of experiences.
Okay, we'll break down a little bit again for one more thing. So maybe now that it's switched a little, Bradley, if you maybe join Mike and Samantha, yeah. Okay, So, okay, now each group, you're a charitable organization. Okay, you've received $1 billion grant from like a Gates or a Buffett or something. Okay, and you're going to solve loneliness now. Like it's a social issue. So, so it's brainstorming about if you were able to create and have the resources to enact some public initiative to reduce loneliness, what would that look like? And maybe it can draw on some of these or anything else that comes up. So you get to be a think tank for a few minutes here. So, okay.
How realistic?
It's a hard thing.
Yeah, being solitary.
I mean, in the same fashion.
Sometimes people want to just get away from
Well, that's pretty much it. I really don't consciously, subconsciously, no good together. And that's the stuff. You only when you fall.
Doing what I love to do. Be down and reflect. Let's say,
And then you can do something, right?
Up there.
That's all you can do.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't.
That's my point. You go, I do as best I can, because I know what I am.
Conducive to work, you might say.
Not that they've done
Why you
some
want
kind of
Southern cracker here.
You just
But I
take
do
it.
have that here.
I know, it was just been out on
With our limited resources. And
You want to go ahead.
consciously reflect on it on Friday.
You need a cookie, could be.
When it gets there.
Yeah.
So the facility, the
Totally makes sense.
the ability.
Maybe another minute?
Right.
So-
Exactly right, getting out.
So there,
Spend a weekend.
probably the majority of our society is lonely. I like your idea of being busy to hide it. But how do you get to, say you have people in their homes, how do you get them out of their homes to get into the community, to interact, to have some joy, find their interest, you know, how do you, it's that motivation.
It's really complicated.
Yeah.
I mean, it is really hard to do right now.
Yeah.
So you sit back and once you're home, it's like,
So like the churches too, though, there's people there that go to check on other people. So there's, you're building a community. That really, you know, when someone in the community, somebody calls them or goes to their door or bring them out, So,
Perhaps like
Life gone crazy.
trying
Modern
to
life gone crazy.
reach a variety of subcultures and focus on, you know, showing people that, hey, like, you may be in a really different area of our society, you know, as this person, but it's important to like recognize the commonalities that people share. And so maybe like,
There's no.
trying to, like, talking about like checking in on people, maybe to do that at concerts as well as libraries, you know, and like, make it so it's, more extensive than just like a single organization like the church. Trying to like, make it as pluralistic and multifaceted as possible in terms of like, you know, like not really having a, I don't know, not like a centralized interest. Like, maybe like diverse as possible.
When you talk about getting people to come to the biggest thing for them, getting.
All right.
I think for a lot of people, getting out of it is the fact that I'm coming with other people. That's a big.
We'll wrap up here.
But I have a chance, other people are listening to it, I have a chance to talk. And nobody judges me for that.
They gave us the idea that we had $1 billion.
Your ideas are as worthy.
We can come up with half a penny.
I was like, no.
Yeah, in this in that context, I think that's the kind of group shit to put together.
All right,
I could agree more.
let's put some ideas out there of if we had the $1 billion, how we could end loneliness. Sounds over. Okay.
300 million into the following.
Give it a budget.
Form a Lonely Hearts Club based on 12 steps. I won't bother to delineate the steps right now.
Yeah. Spend money on your wood.
What are the additional steps?
Okay.
The final step.
200 million for a helpline for the lonely, so they can call and talk to somebody who professes to be interested in them.
And it's good at it.
And it's good, really good. Maybe it'll be some robot finally. Who knows? If we get a professional robots.
You'll end up with.
Okay, I'll let the others chime in with their stuff.
We said $0.
We're gonna take you.
The idea is where you put money to it, you screw it up.
Okay.
So what are you putting money into?
Well, I say that that 300 million, as long as it's a problem of community. So if you're gonna have that much money, you know, you invest in the community and then make, you know, with activity center or whatever there is, and when there is a community with a lot of activities and a lot of things to do, you know, loneliness, or lonely people find their way out into that community and probably things be better.
You can throw our 500 million in to help that out.
Activity centers. I agree, there's truth to what you say.
But I'm also saying that if we already have all the facilities we need to get people together to have the kind of conversation that we were talking about, where simply that people can talk, be listened to without being judged, and feel like when they get together with other folks, they're getting something out of it. That they have because people, they don't, not to be lectured to. Simply have conversation around. There could be issues of the day. We have racism, sexism, whatever the issue, but we can talk about it in a certain way. That we have sort of ground rules about getting together and talking, but like I said, the simple thing is just being listened to and being able to talk.
I'd say more art centers. As an art instructor, I find that many people who are introverted and have a hard time making friends really excel at art, especially with kids, which is my discussion I'm talking about, but with children who don't fit into peer groups because maybe they're not a team-based personality, they don't fit in with sports, or maybe they're, I always call them maybe old souls, you know, they're going to make a better adult than they do a child. So maybe some people here can relate to that. So I always tell some of my children that parents will come to me and say, my child doesn't make very many friends, they sit and draw all day. And I say, well, that's because, you know, they're not probably a large group participant. So a lot of times when we have art, people develop or discover their talents, which then earns them peer recognition, which then earns them a place within their group. And then they tend to grow a little more happier. Because every time you develop a self-talent and have pride within yourself, then you tend to be happier because you feel like you're a good part of one of the clogs in society, you know. I think it's important to develop talents.
On a lighter note, we need a little more sunshine around here.
That's true.
If you would have said solve hunger, okay, it's easier to identify hungry people. They want to eat. If I'm lonely, how do you find these people? There's a bridge there.
You know about the thing in Great Britain, they already have it. Identified a person they've designated, they're actually doing a department on loneliness in their whole project, so let's wait and see what they do.
Yeah, they, one of the, the equivalent of a congressperson there in the UK, there's a young lady that got elected, and she was championing the idea of trying to end loneliness. And she was shot, actually. She was assassinated, I guess, may not be the right word, but by just someone who's really I guess it's like what you could say, like a right-wing radical. She was whatever they call the opposite in the UK. Jo Cox was her name. So they created a foundation in her memory to sort of carry on that project and this movement in the UK, where it's sort of receiving some recognition at what would be the federal level, whatever the parallel is of that in the UK. It's they're trying. They appointed a minister of loneliness. One of the I guess it's like all the different committees that people can be on, like in Congress. It's an equivalent to having a committee on that, and she heads that. So a little bit of a history note.
Isn't it kind of like a drug card or something here? Equivalent, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
On par with that.
Yeah. And the former our former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, that was one of the issues that he was championing as well, along with trying to be conscious of what the government can do to foster emotional well-being, reduce loneliness, and foster emotional well-being. That was an outgoing initiative. But someone said something that jogged my memory, that there may have to be some customization for the things that engage. So
extroverts might be lonely and introverts might be lonely. I think it's something that knows no boundaries, but the way in which programs are developed could probably be customized sort of by some personality characteristics.
I think unfortunately, kids these days are growing up in a world, with the social media and stuff like that, which they don't socialize how we did when we were kids, everybody hanging out in the street and mom comes out, come on in. Kids could be alone in the room till 2 in the morning or whatever, the parents allow. And they are right there, they are lonely, but they're also part of a group. So I don't know if you can qualify that as a lonely or not, but they're by themselves, they're isolated from human contact.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've read about that with social media. So it seems as if you actually have a relationship with somebody and then you also friend or something in social media, that those types of interaction with someone that you actually know in person tend to have a positive effect on people. But there's not as much evidence that is by just interacting in social media, it doesn't seem to have the same effect on people as someone that you actually also know. So yeah.
Well, really, I think a driving force as a human being, and as some studies that I've done teaching junior high, is everybody always wants to belong to a tribe, right? Mm-hmm. And so we want some sort of peer recognition. It can be positive or it can be negative. I mean, it doesn't really matter as long as you're being validated in some way, right? That's what we all strive for, no matter what. I mean, it comes down to that's the basic, food group, I guess, of emotions, is that you want to belong to something. And so that's where, then that draws all into the bullying and how that all feeds in. Even as adults, we get bullied, So we don't always label it that way, but, we all have that one person we work with, right?
Yeah.
It made us do things we didn't want to do.
We call that management.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just like, oh, we're gonna do.
So it might be that there's just, if there weren't things like bullying or something, maybe there would be that in and of itself would just be something that contributes to less loneliness.
Right.
So maybe it's removing barriers to connection, maybe a part of it. And then I think, this is some into the positive in and of itself, aside from removing barriers. I think there's things that can be done potentially to alleviate loneliness. I think thanks everybody for participating in that series of activities. We'll transition into a focus on community arts and well-being, and Anna Alcade is on herself involved in the community as an artist and on the board of the Hildegard Center for the Arts.
Hildegard Center for the Arts. I have my own art studio called Urban Legends.
So I'll hand it over, and if you want to be there, if you want to be up here, or whatever, however you'd like to be.
I'll just maybe stand for a minute and then sit down with that. So yes. My name's Anna Calde, and I've been an artist in the Lincoln community for, oh gosh, I don't even know how long. So my mom was an artist, and she had an art degree, so I've been doing art since I was young. I went to the university, traveled around, did some marketing for a while, and then came back and got my graphic art degree. So I've had multi levels of different types of art, from very structured to fine art. I love community art. I love teaching kids. I taught 3rd through 8th grade in parochial school for 8 years, and they had me teaching first kindergarten on up, and I was like, no, I really want to focus on more of the kids that really need the art, like 3rd on through 8th before they got to high school and stuff. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit today is some of the arts, how your brain function works on that. Why do we need our right brain so much? So, and also I have a little art studio called Urban Legends now. I've had for about 6.5 years over in Westland area. We concentrate on a lot of public classes, private classes, as well as we go out into the community. So we go out to the community and we work with participants with Alzheimer's. I go to about 6 different adult day services as well as nursing homes. I also work with autistic kids, and I have worked, actually, believe it or not, I have taught art to the blind. So it's very challenging when they call you up and say, we'd like to take an art class. And I say, well, how would you like me to do that? And they go, you're the art teacher. You tell us. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to take that as a challenge. So on that. Actually, what we we did door hangers, and I took glue, Elmer's glue, and drew lines on it and let it dry so they could feel the ridges and paint on it. So it was pretty cool class and stuff. So on that and everything. But there's a lot to be said about the right and the left side of the brain here. So you know, people don't always think about it, how that all works together and everything. But I had brought some flyers here, which are kind of fun. And I always kind of find this kind of fascinating. This is my husband, Ray, too, if I just introduce my handsome sidekick here. So. And this is, there's some controversy on whether the left and the right brain truly are divided. Because, of course, they do laterally work together on that. But I'm sure even by now you may think of yourself as either a left brain dominant or right brain dominant type of person here. So your left brain is going to be more of your logic, your analytical, your day-to-day things like I'm going to get to my car, I'm going to drive to work today, I know my code into the door, I know I'm going to work with these people, I'm going to have lunch at this time and everything. Sometimes even you go to drive to work and you just automatic pilot and you're like, wow, this 10-minute ride, I don't even remember like getting here, you know? So that's where your left brain really functions and get you going on there, but by itself, because it's actually going to do automatic pilot and store things. Your right brain is going to be more of your what new path am I doing today? So that's more of that where you're going to go to right brain mode is when you're going to come in to the room. You're going to go like, oh, I've never been here before. Where am I going to sit? Who am I going to talk to? Do I know any of these people? You know, kind of like what I was doing. I walked in here, so you know. So the right brain is going to be more of your creative, learning, finding new paths and stuff. That's why art is really good for a child or someone with trauma or somebody, again, who's lonely, maybe. It's very therapeutic. It's like yoga for your brain, doing art, because since the two hemispheres are divided, when you're doing art and you're thinking about what color am I going to use, where am I going to put this? Well, I'm not sure if I want to do this path or not. So your brain is just constantly firing on the right side and learning new paths. So what it does is it actually shuts off your left side. So your left side is going to be your language, your math, you know, your cognitive thinking, all the stuff that you know how to do. Sit, you know, in school, stay in line, you know, follow the rules. What are the rules? I know what they are. So that's all going to be your left side. So therefore, what's really interesting is all that left brain part that can also control your panic part of your brain too. That's the part that's like, oh my gosh, did I pay that electric bill? Oh my gosh, I got to give a presentation tomorrow. You know, and it's just like nagging because it's trying to keep everything in order on there, okay? So your right brain, when you take a break from that and you sit down and you do your art, you're doing your art, you're going along, you're sketching, you're picking out if you want blue, you're picking out if you want red, you're learning how to blend them together, you're seeing where all that goes on the color wheel and stuff. It actually shuts this site down, right? So, hence, when do we use our left brain and our right brain? All right, so have you ever ran into somebody and they speak a different language? Okay. What's the first thing you see people do if they're trying to communicate with someone who's, they don't know what the language is? So,
sign that. Hand gestures.
Hand gestures. Maybe a little bit louder. Yeah. Hey, where is the bathroom? They're not deaf. They just know a different language, right? Like that. So, but we resort to more creative thinking, and that's when you go into your right brain mode, because you're thinking on your feet, like, what do I do to communicate with this person? You may even stop for a moment and almost be speechless, and you might use your hands to go like, you know, where can I drive to get something to eat? You know, and we'll do that without even thinking about it. So, because our left side is our language part of our brain. So, one of my favorite things to do is make someone so that they can't talk. So let's see, Nick, you probably, since you're a speaker, you're probably gonna have a gift for gab, I would assume. Maybe.
I don't know if I have a gift to do it though.
Okay, so let me try an experiment with you. Okay, stand up. Okay, so I just came from another planet and I've never seen a spiral staircase before. Could you tell me what one is or how does it work? Spiral staircase. But that's the thing is by peer pressure and by society pressure, we have to learn math, right? If you don't know all your math and everything, you're never going to get a good job. You're never going to make it through college. You know, if you don't know how to read, you're never going to be anything. You know, all that peer pressure. Same with, you know, why do we ride a bike? Why was the reason why you learned how to ride a bike? Exactly. All the other kids are doing that stuff. So a lot of things we do are for, you know, peer recognition and stuff as the group and stuff. So what Betty Edwards' idea is that we can make people use more of their right brain and do more of have a more creative and compassionate, intuitive life if they would learn how to see the world a little bit different. So, okay. So the guy who actually came up with the two parts of the brain was Roger Sperry, and in I think like 81 or 80, he actually got the Nobel Peace Prize for coming up with heavy facts on the left brain doing one thing and the right brain doing another thing, okay? Which actually, your left hand is actually run by your right brain, you know, that's not brain knows, and your right hand is run by the other side stuff. I always say to myself that I'm probably extremely right brain because when I was growing up, my mom used to say, get back into the box, not think outside the box, you know. I was always thinking outside the box on that. So anyway, though, after Roger Sperry had gotten the Nobel Peace Prize, Betty Edwards was already writing down all her notes and everything to start writing this book. So then later on in the 80s, she published this. So that was back in the 80s, but you know, hey, go 82, that was when I graduated. She actually then had this published, and then it went on worldwide to be published in many different languages. It's pretty commonly known amongst colleges and in the art studies on this. So, and what she does too is she has people draw like upside down. If you copy something upside down, rather than looking at it right side up, you actually draw better and have more lateral spacing correct than if you draw it right side up. Because the psychology in art is your left brain is always imprinting. It's remembering things. It's storing everything away in a little file there, right? So your left brain is thinking like, oh, one time I saw a dog and it was mean and it barked at me and tried to bite me. So therefore, let's always be leery and scared of dogs, you know? Your right brain is the side that goes, you know what? Not every dog's probably a bad dog. I've, you know, seen some other dogs that have been pretty friendly and stuff, and it kind of gives a new thought pattern. So that's like when you get really scared or have like stress syndromes, that's where things get locked into the left brain. So it's really important that we keep the arts and everything to get out, to get that hold of that left brain away from the whole body so that people can heal. Okay? So, I just always find all this fascinating, so I hope I'm not boring anybody in here, but I just think it's kind of neat that people can react, you know, certain ways depending on which side that they lean on and stuff. So now at one point in my life too, I, myself being more of a right brain person, used to kind of shun away left brain people because they weren't like me, you know. So do you have that opposite? Has anybody ever felt that opposite of somebody where you've been like maybe in a work situation or even in a social group and you're like, well, that person's a little too uptight. I can't hang out with them. Or that person's a little too like loose and free. I can't hang out with them. You know, there's usually a type that you're, you know, an opposite like that. In my old age, I learned to embrace more of the opposite. I found in work situations, you know, committees and things like that, a lot of times if I pair myself up with an opposite person, then we complement each other. We can become the yin and yang of each other, and we really can pull out some really nice, you know, meetings, groups, activities, you know, social engagements together stuff. But that, you know, it takes a little bit of swallowing some pride of myself, going, yes, Anna, you're not the most organized person, so you're going to let Susie, you know, count all the spoons and bring all the stuff like that. You know, you're going to tell the whole group what to do and how to run it, but, you know, Bobby's going to take care of like how many napkins and the how many coffee cups and all that, So sometimes it's good to know what your strong points are, what side of the brain you are, so that you can complement with somebody and not run away from them. So this is my compliment right here. So I always like to say, I'm a circle and he's a grid. So we work out well together. Ray's definitely a left brain person. He's very analytical. He works with calculus and things like that during the day. He's a civil engineer, works with some surveying teams and stuff. The nice thing too, if you know what the opposite brain's weakness is, you can do things like when they walk into the room, just take the rug and make it a little askew, maybe move the furniture a little bit. So then they walk in, they're like, something's wrong with the room. I always laugh when I first met him. I went to his apartment and all of his paintings and things on the wall were all the same line all the way around, like in one linear line, nice and even, no groupings or anything. But he got pretty good at groupings now. So, but that's the left brain stuff. So, some little tricks that you can do too. That there's like different ways to trick or make your brain stronger. Actually, when you meet different people, if you actually look at them more with your left eye than with your right, your left eye is the one that actually can soak in more information. So there's theories about that, where if you look at them more just like squinting, looking at one eye, although, I don't know, I'm always scared when we get somebody get slapped, but that's another little theory that you can do too. There's some drawing things that you can do too to test your brain. Let's see. Some random facts that maybe I'll close up here with that is that actually when you're a child, you develop your right brain first before the age of 5. Okay. And that's another thing why I always tell people, they'll come to me for private lessons and they'll say, oh, my 5-year-old, my 4-year-old is really good at art. Will you take them on as a private lesson? No, I will not. I will not take them on until they're 8, because not till the age of 7 you start developing your left side of your brain. So therefore, you need both sides of your brains to be able to do scissors and pens and hold them correctly and to follow directions on that. You need both sides of your brains. Up to that point, that's why they say children learn like a sponge, is because their right brain is always in curious kind of survival mode and everything. So they're always just gathering information. That's what's so great about kids. They'll look everybody in the eye. They'll study everything. They're not afraid to say anything. It's because they're just wholly taking it into their right side. Okay, so they haven't developed their left side yet. So that's kind of interesting. Believe it or not, our brain only weighs 3 pounds. I was hoping that was more of my weight gain there. Maybe I had a big brain or something, but on that, other than that, I think that's about all that I had today on that. There's lots of different theories. Some people believe that there's not really a left and right brain, but I tell you, after teaching art for 20 years, I think that there is. I think that there's definitely different kinds of personality types that lean one way or the other. And I find it all very interesting. So, any questions or?
Education has always been like what I view as like society's top priority, and it's interesting that you're a art educator, because I'm curious as to like how you would incorporate both like left brain and right brain dominant set of classes into one, or perhaps like how would you like create a curriculum that endorses both at the same time? Because like the way it's currently set up is like, okay, art's over here, math is over here, all of this, but like what would you do to sort of like bridge that gap in the educational environment?
There's some neat classes that you can do that actually mix science and art. So I kind of seen a little bit more of movement through that. Just like when you see, right now you see everybody making like slime. You ever seen that? Slime? Okay, so that's what slime is. Slime is actually glue and, a solution you put together and it kind of grow and change, and in it firm and it'll, stay hard like that. So things where you can take science, alcohol inks is another thing. That's something that I do teach. Alcohol inks is we're taking high concentrations of alcohol and dropping it into different colors. So I get a lot of the left brainers who are very interested in how the colors all work together and make little pools and sails and all that. but yet it can be slightly controlled with a brush and everything. And people usually go one way or the other. They're more interested in the cells and how the colors and inks interact. And that's going to be more of a controlled environment. Or they want to learn how to do the landscaping, which is a little bit more right brain because you can't control all that. Alcohol inks cannot be controlled. They're just kind of moving a little bit on their own. You can stop it a certain way when you blow on it and everything, but it's actually alcohol that's infused into like a speedball ink, and so it'll make little rings and circles and things. So I think that there's ways that you can do that, and there's different arts for different types of brains too. Like if you're a left brainer, then you may like origami, where you can do more of the exact folds and everything. Since I'm like a super right dominated person, origami is very hard for me. Can I do it? Yes. I've learned how to do some folds and things like that. Do I retain it? Not very well. I have to, like, every time I teach an origami class, I have to go back over the notes and learn it again because it's really exact. I don't know if any of you guys know Stevens. Her last name's Stevens. I just forgot her first name right now. She's an origami artist here in Lincoln. She's really, really, really fabulous. We do some stuff through Girl Scouts, and she does like full settings, almost like a painting, but it's out of paper, and they're really amazing. So, and she's very left brainer, I call her, but she's found an art that works for her. A lot of geometric art, pen and ink, that can lean more towards the left side. There's actually people who are really good at using both sides of their brains who do medical illustrating in books and stuff. I had a friend who did that and stuff. So you can use both on that. Not everything has to be real free form, like on that stuff. But that is a good question. So one other thing too, I'll tell you what that, you're talking about using your brain. When I go into Alzheimer's centers, I have people who have never done art. Maybe they're in their 80s or 90s, and they're like, I've had families say, oh, my dad will never paint a picture, no way. And I'm like, you'd be surprised because, they have basically no job or no other career to go to now. They're sedative, they're just have not much to do right now. So they'll come to the art class and they'll start drawing or painting. I'll play a little music. So I always do kind of like what I call 5 senses teaching. We're all kind of engaged with stories and music and the art and while we're talking and engaging. And people will literally just come out of their shell because they're using, kind of both sides of their brains. They're very relaxed, and it comes out as a very positive, almost again like a meditative yoga type of class. So it's very good for you. It's good. It keeps your breathing down, keeps your blood pressure down. Very good. It's meditative. I think we're going to find that we're going to be doing a lot more art coming up. We're teaching, I'm working with CHI through the foundation right now. We're doing a program called Second Step. We're actually going to junior highs, and they're teaching them basically, this sounds corny, like how to be a proper adult. We're focused so much on stuffing those kids' brains with, math and reading, and, we're taking away all their physical exercise and taking away their PE, taking away their math, not much time for music even. And then they don't always learn how to go on social media, so they're not learning how to interact with people. On the playground, you play, you learn how to talk to somebody you're not used to talking to, things like that. With the Second Step program, we actually go in and they have classes that they learn about talking to each other, anti-bullying, how to maybe get into a confrontation with someone without being violent. Which, believe it or not, that should be a pretty common thing, don't you think? But it's not these days, everybody's me. So they teach that in the class, and then we go after school, and we go into their after school programs, and we do an art project. Such as we have one art project that we call newspaper fashion. We make them get into small groups. One person has to be the CEO of the company, somebody has to be the designer, somebody has to be the model, and they can only build a fashion outfit out of only newspaper, staples, tape, and scissors, and just some paper clips. So, and that's all they get. And we show them some folds with some or origami hats and things like that. and then we let them go for about 45 minutes. And the stuff they come up with is amazing. And kids who won't usually participate will jump in and participate. You know, we try to, if there's a kid not doing well with another group, we try to change them around a little bit and stuff. So again, everybody feels validated, everybody feels like part of the group, everybody gives an idea, feels part of the group. So that's something that we're doing right now, is just trying to get everybody involved. Again, kind of goes a little bit with that loneliness thing, you know, teaching people how to be a decent adult. I don't think they even touched upon that. You know, some of us went to school in the 70s, 80s, 90s, you know, they didn't. I mean, you always heard, don't be a bully. Well, a lot of kids don't know, like, what is not be a bully, you know? Mm. Are you actually the bully and you don't know? Right? But that all has to do too with what side of the brain that you like to focus on. So anyway, so I like to keep one of these up and around, and you know, maybe even sometimes in my head, like when I meet somebody, which side do they kind of fall on, you know? And is that somebody who's going to be add to my team or my circle of friends, or is that someone that, you know, really going to maybe not pull me down, or maybe not want to, really can't work with me, or I can't work with them, you know? So I try to find something I can work with everybody on, but kind of interesting. You kind of know a little bit more about these too. You can also see why sometimes you have conflict with the other side on that, you know. But if someone told you you can't do art, you can. So come to my studio sometime, and I'm glad to help you out. Okay?
Do you have a website?
Yeah, we're at urbanlegendsart.com. And we also have a really very active Facebook page where we actually post lots of pictures and things like that. We were doing these little planters today at the Lawn and Garden and Leisure and Art Show now, it's called this year. So it was just kind of neat. They actually had the Art Council incorporate some art programs into the Lawn and Garden, which kind of added another twist to it. I think it was a really great idea. I think you'll see more opportunities for art and creative outlets coming around, which will bring people more together. I think it really does bring people together. So, any other questions, or did I bore you to death, or what?
How do you spell your last name?
It's ALCALDE, Alcalde. Yeah, so it means the mayor in Spanish. Yeah. So his name's Ray Alcalde, which is like the king mayor. So it can be kind of bossy.
I don't let it go up to my head.
Yeah, it can be a little bit bossy and stuff. So, but this is a great book. So if you like to study psychology and art and why people do certain things, it's pretty interesting stuff. So,
All right.
All right. I do have some flyers if anybody wants. I'll just leave them on the table.
Okay. Well, this is the first for me, finishing a little bit before I thought something would finish. So. Growth. Yeah, thanks for coming for the International Day of Happiness. Thanks for presenting. Thanks for covering. And thanks for being here. So, all right.
Give you guys more little flyers for our studio and talk about a little bit more what we're all about there. So yeah. Thanks for listening.